You want to learn D5 render, but you don't know where to start, right? And every tutorial out there assumes you kind of know what's going on, but what if you want to start from scratch? So in the next 3 hours, I'm going to take you all the way from zero to hero. So even if you've never opened up the software, that's okay. I'm going to show you how to get started and all the steps along the way to get your first exported rendering. First, I'll walk you through choosing the right plan, because there's a community free version and then there's a couple paid tiers with very important differences between them. Then we'll get into importing, where you'll import your first SketchUp model, which I'll be providing for free download. And then we'll get into lighting, which makes everything pop. And then materials, which makes everything look photorealistic. And then camera settings, so we can export our beautiful renderings. By the end of this, you'll have a finished image that you're proud of and a thorough understanding of how to use D5 render. And the best part is this whole course is free. So if that sounds like a good idea, let's get right into it. Enjoy. Now, before we get into our project, let's get familiar with the D5 launcher. This will actually be your starting point for any D5 render project. This gets installed along with D5 render. Once you open it up, you'll be on the home page, and from here, you can see your current render version. You can start a new project with this blue new button. You can open previous projects, and any previous project will be listed here right under recent projects. Scrolling down, we'll see events. So you'll see like webinars. Sometimes you'll see my face here as well. And below that, you'll see some getting started projects. These are fun to open up and see how the D5 creative team actually puts together a scene. We'll be hopping in some of these in future videos, but I want you to see what's here, because it's really important that you understand what this launcher does, because this is the genesis of everything. Then scrolling down, we've got workflow. This is where you can update your D5 render version. You can also switch between different versions right here. So you can see I've got version 2.11 also installed, and right now I'm on 3.0.1, which is the latest version as of this recording. Then we've got D5 Lite. This is a lightweight plugin that you can be using for SketchUp. It's kind of like a lightweight D5 render directly in it with AI capabilities. Really cool. We'll talk about that as well. And then we've got our sync area. This is where you can download plugins so your favorite tools can talk to D5 render. This is how you push SketchUp or Revit Geometry or Rhino directly into D5 render, and it'll sync. As you move your camera around, it'll also move around in D5 render. Really cool. Once you model something, it appears there as well. So you've got a couple different ways to import, and we'll talk about that in a later video. Then we've got Online Works. It's part of the D5 Works package that came in 3.0. This is an extension to their already large asset library. You can go ahead and actually download assets. Some are free, some are paid. So it's just like another way for you to get more assets without having you to source them. And just to note, your user interface might look a little different from mine. I'm on what's called a Teams plan. So I've got a couple more collaborative features. So for example, everyone in my office can create a team project, which lets multiple people come and work together, and it's all in one location. You can also create a new project directly from here. And you can also open up a show reel, which is kind of like their online cloud library where you can store files. You know, I've got some 360s here. So that's what that is. Then right down here, we've got settings. Settings are really important if you just want to manage where the program gets installed and where any cloud files are saved. The D5 render asset library is all cloud-based, so make sure these assets are being downloaded somewhere where you've got a lot of space. And then if you're on a team plan, you can actually choose where your asset and your project folders are deployed. We'll talk more about that later, but that is all here. And then lastly, we've got help. Help is great because this is where you can send support your logs. If you ever have an issue, you click this button, it'll go ahead and generate logs for you, and then you can send it to support and help diagnose a crash. And then lastly, you've got your account information where you can go ahead and see information about your plan. So now that we got that out of the way, let's actually hop into D5 render. And I find it best if we actually hop into a real project. So I'm going to go right here and let's double click this residence lawn. You'll see this little download button. It's a cloud asset, so it'll download and then it'll turn into a check mark once it's done. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll see you in the next video. Once it's downloaded, let's click this and we can check out the D5 render user interface. If you get a warning, don't worry, hit don't show again and hit open. Once you load up the file, you may see something that looks like this. Don't worry, this is just saying, hey, you've got some assets that a previous user has put in the file that you don't have in your cloud library. We can go ahead and hit update all. Give that a couple seconds. Once they download, you'll see that these little placeholder cards will turn into real meshes. And this is very typical if you're working with someone else on your team. They're going to have different assets than you. It takes a couple seconds and it'll resync. That's not an issue. There you go. Looks all normal. So now let's run through what we're looking at here. So looking over here on the top left, we're going to see the file name, Residence Lawn. Right over here, we've got our menu. This is where we can go make new projects, turn into a team project as needed. We could do save as and everything. But most importantly, in this area, if you see these settings dependent on your hardware, I do recommend checking all these on. This is actually going to give you a really nice frame rate boost. This is leveraging some NVIDIA technology, which is also leveraging AI to help boost the overall performance of your scene, which is really cool. Then right down here, it'll say your username and a quick access button to open up our launcher. So here's our launcher. Right from there. Then right next to it, we've got a direct import button. This is going to be really useful. We'll talk about this when it comes to actually importing models. And then right over here is our asset library. This is going to load up the asset library. We've got materials, we've got models. You can sort through this. It's well categorized. You can even search for the name of assets. So if I go over here and I type in ficus, for example, look at that. So pretty sweet search. You've got over 14,000 models here. And then you've got over 2,000 materials. I'll clear that out. So that's our asset library. We're going to be spending a lot of time there. And then moving down, we've got our scene list. So the scene list, these are kind of like hotspots. But I want to point out that they're not just camera positions. You know, I've got this little demo here where it's changing the time of day. So it's going from day to night. That's the interesting thing. It will remember environment settings. So you can do like a day or a night study or an option A, option B study. It can actually toggle on different layers, different objects. You see how the Porsche was disappearing and everything. So pointing that out there. Then when you click this button, edit camera, this is actually how you edit all of your camera settings. So it's a very sleek, very easy way to manage all this. You can rename these. You can even group them. You can make a little scene group. So you could say option A, and you can tuck things right in there. So it helps you get organized. Then right down here, we've got our layer system. So layer system, like any typical CAD software, we can be organized. So check this out. So if I hit new layer and I call this car, I can actually left click the Porsche right here and change the layer to car. Or I can go from the world outliner. So these are all the objects that exist in my scene, and actually drag it onto here. You've got a couple options, but you can see I can either lock it, I can toggle it on and off, and this check mark means it's the default layer. All you have to do is just single click and it will change which is the current layer. So any new object will automatically go there. So that's very handy. So with the object outliner, you'll notice that there's just like hundreds of things here. And it's like, well, how do you manage all this? Well, you can actually search for objects right in here. So if I want a light, I can type light in there, or I can go over here to my filter system and actually filter by category. So these are all my lights. These are all pieces of nature, and this is everything. So pretty easy there. Then moving over here, we've got some editor information. If I'm in a camera, or viewport camera, it'll tell me the scene. So if I look right down here, scene 7, that's where that's coming from. That's just telling me, hey, I'm in this view, right? I can override the exposure, the focal length, the camera clipping plane, depth of field. If I'm in perspective or parallel or 2-point perspective, I can do all that in here. And this will always exist whether or not you're in a camera or not. Then over here are some nice display settings. So you see over here, we've got this little sticker looking thing. That's a decal. And that is because it lives under the asset folder. So if you find these icons distracting, you can actually just toggle the visibility. They still exist. It's just the icon gets turned off. Okay. Then we've got different rendering modes. We've got lit, which is the realistic mode. We've got wireframe, if you just want to check out the geometry density. We've got clay mode. And we can toggle if things are dynamic or not. So basically like stop the wind, stop the moving cars. That's what this guy will do. And then if your computer is struggling to, fly around a scene, for example, you can also switch to smooth mode, which just turns off all real-time rendering effects. So you can see it kind of looks bad. Well, that's because all the shadows are off, but it will help with performance. You can see here, I'm running at 120 frames per second. And you might be saying to yourself, well, Andy, I don't have this. How do I get this? If you go over here to view, show statistics, this guy will appear. I always have this up because it lets me know how well my computer is running. If I import in anything and it affects my scene, poorly, I'll catch that immediately. And I'm just going to turn off depth of field, so everything looks super sharp there. Then over here, we've got our navigation system. We'll talk more about this in the next video, but this is how we adjust anything related to our navigation controls, like moving around the scene and everything. Over here is our environment tab. We've got a couple different sun systems. We've got a dynamic sun system I recommend beginners play with, just so you get a little familiar with how you can actually cast shadows. You can plug in a time of day. You can even plug in your longitude, your latitude, the month, the day. You can really dial it in. Like if you want to do a sun study, these settings are here for you, right? But this is also where we can add in clouds if we want. You can toggle them on or off. We can add fog, see that? And we can even add precipitation like rain and snow. So there's a lot we can do here with just a couple clicks, but I want to point this all out because there's a lot here. And if nobody ever points it out, you may not realize like all this awesome functionality exists. The next we have effects. So think of this as your post-processing window. This is kind of like Photoshop directly in D5 render. You can play with the exposure, the contrast, the white balance and everything. We'll talk more about this in a later video. And then lastly, we have the inspector. The inspector only exists if you have an object selected. This is going to tell you the properties of an object. So if I click this car, there we go. It tells me the layer. I can, duplicate it. I can randomize the size, the location of it, the rotation. I've got all the transform properties of it all within here. Click a decal so you can see this is dynamic in a way where it'll change depending on what's selected. And then lastly, right up here, we've got our final modes. We've got a VR mode. So if you actually want to see this in a headset, if you don't see this, you can always go to menu, preference, widget, and you can actually toggle these things on and off. Some of them are going to be limited to a pro plan and some will be available for free. So just point that out. So if this looks a little different, don't freak out. Then we've got AI post-processing. This is a really cool feature where you can take a rendering, right? And then you can actually use AI to turn into something else. So check that out. So I did a little style transfer here. And this is all stuff we'll be covering in the course. Like, look at that. Just cranks the photorealism through the roof. Then we've got the tour function. This is where we could do like 360 tours. Then we've got our render mode. So this is image mode. This is where we go and export out images. We can plug in different aspect ratios, the resolution, if it's 2K, 4K, if we want render map channels, formats, and if we want to do a batch render using the render queue. So that's all fun. And we also have our animation tools. So we've got different presets. So we could do phasing diagrams where the model literally drops in. We can do simple zoom ins. So watch this and make our own animation. And this is all stuff we'll cover. Look at that. Super simple. So now that we've done an overview of the interface, we can get straight into navigation in the next video. So now let's talk about navigation, how you actually move around in D5 render. So I'm going to go ahead and X out of here. And now let's cover the basic shortcuts. So navigation in D5 comes down to a couple things. It's a mixture of our keyboard shortcuts as well as mouse movements. So I'll break it down. First, let's learn about W on our keyboard. When we hold that down, we're going to start moving forward. So you see that? If I hold down S, I'm going to start moving backwards, right? If I hold down D, I'll go to the right, and A, I'll go to the left, right? So WASD, these are your 4 core keys that you'll be using a lot. Okay, so go ahead and practice that. Feel free to pause this video if you just want to get comfortable with this. If you've ever played any video games, you'll feel right at home. But again, this is also very similar to a lot of other real-time rendering engines, so it shouldn't feel too different. Then there's going to be the instance where you want to go up and down. We can use Q to go up. And again, I'm holding these keys down, and we can use E to go down. So now let's say I want to go down here to where the Porsche is, right? I could, just keep holding down E and then holding down W to get there, but it's kind of clunky this way, right? I'm basically like zigzagging, and that doesn't feel too good. So all I need to do is use my mouse. So if I hold down the right mouse button on my mouse, I'm basically looking around. So pay attention to like my head, right? This is what's happening. I'm literally using the right mouse button to look around. So this is how you can look up, you can look down, you can look to the right, to the left, and so on. And I bring this up because if you hold down W while you're doing this, it'll always follow the direction of what your mouse is moved to, right? So if I move my mouse to the right and hold down W, I'll go that way. Okay, they're not independent, they work together, right? So what I always do is I've got my right mouse button down and I'm using WASD to move around. So you can see, very easy to just kind of drop in there now. So now there's going to be instances where we need to cover a lot of ground. So if I hold down S with my right mouse button, notice how I'm kind of going a little bit slow. Well, if I hold down Shift, I'm going to get a little speed burst. So you see how I'm going faster and then I let go, kind of slows down. So now I'll go forward with W, hold down Shift, little speed burst. I could do the opposite and slow down by holding down spacebar. So now this is regular W and then this is spacebar. So keep that in mind when you're flying around. If the general movement speed is a little slow, you can look right down here. You'll see right now my movement speed is at 5. This is the general feeling of what 5 is. We can always boost that. If we go right over here to navigation, we can actually increase this. So I'm going to set it to 100 just for the sake of this, and I'll hit W. See how much faster I am? This is totally going to vary depending on the size of project you're working on. If you're working on master plan, you're going to crank that up all the way. If you're working on a small residential, this might be around like 50 or 30 or 10. You know, you see what feels best. And what I like about this setup is as you're working, you can actually hold down the right mouse button and play with your scroll wheel. You can either go up or down and pay attention to what's going on here, right? If I go up or down, you see how I'm dynamically changing it. So you've got all that. And if you're wondering, like, Andy, how am I supposed to remember all this? You gave me like 20 different hotkeys. It's actually all right down here. So all these settings I'm talking about, you can always reference it right here. All right. So the last important thing on your mouse is actually the left mouse button. When you click and drag, you're actually going to go into this kind of like orbit mode. And wherever you click and hold, that's actually the origin of your spin. Okay. So depending on where that is, it's going to change your rotation point. So that is the free navigation mode. Then there's the walk mode. And this is literally like imitating, you know, a human being walking around. It's going to keep you at a consistent height. It's going to like pop over hedges, go upstairs and everything, and it'll bump into stairs, bump into objects. So this is literally like someone navigating a space. Everything has collisions at this point. For the most part, I'm always in free. I rarely use walk unless I want to get like an eye level perspective. That's the only time I'd use that, right? So the other settings here, this is your eye height. So this is basically Q and E, but just in a slider right here. This is going to let you rotate the camera. I don't recommend doing that. But let's say, for example, I did that by accident. If I right click, it'll actually reset a slider, and just keep that in mind because that's true for a lot of sliders. You can always cancel that out with a right click. And then here is our mouse speed setting. This is how fast our right mouse button held down will be. I really like 2. You can boost it, but I find it like moves too much. Okay. But again, will vary depending on the type of project you're working on. So I recommend you pause the video, you fly around, and you kind of challenge yourself and see if you can get into different areas. If you want a little bit of homework, try and go under this tree and look back at the Porsche. So to walk you through that, I'll hold down the right mouse button. I'll hold down W. Now that I've got that here, still have my right mouse button held, and I'm just moving to the left. And look at that. So I got something like that. Easy. So now that we figured this out, let's hop into a new project. So when it comes to starting a new project, you've got a couple different ways to enter a project. If you're in a project, you can actually just go right up here and go to File, New Project. Or if you want to go an extra step, you could go to Open Launcher and hit New. Doesn't matter which way you do. Since I'm here, I'm just going to hit File, New Project. And up to you if you want to save or not. I'm just going to hit Don't Save. And in just a couple seconds, you'll be in a fresh project that has got nothing in it except terrain. By default, terrain will be in here, and that's basically this ground here. It's an infinite ground plane. So in the next video, let's talk about importing geometry into here. So now let's talk about importing a model. There's a couple of different ways we can do this. Right up here is the direct import function. If I click this, it's going to let me import FBX, D5A, SketchUp, 3DM, OBJ, you name it. Basically, all the main project formats are here. which is great. The only downside of this is the geometry is essentially frozen. So just to kind of talk about what that is you're basically importing it, and any changes that are made to the model have to be manually refreshed. The other option is to use a live sync. So if I go over here to menu and go to open launcher, if you haven't done this before, you can actually go over to workflow, go straight to sync and install any of the plugins for the tools that you use. If I'm in Rhino, go ahead and install that. If you're using Revit, go ahead and install it. If you use SketchUp, go ahead and install that. For this project, it is a SketchUp project, so go ahead and hit install. If you're saying, Andy, I don't have SketchUp, that's totally fine. That's why the direct import tool is really nice, because you don't need the source software. This is great because I work with like a lot of 3ds Max files and I don't necessarily always have 3ds Max installed. So I can always import directly through here. So we'll cover both ways, but just know this is how you get that. So if you want the plugin, all you have to do is hit install and then run the installer. Because I'm a user of D5 Lite, it actually uses a newer version of the sync plugin. So go ahead and download that if you're using SketchUp, and I'll show you briefly what that is. So now let me show you the two different ways to import. We've got our direct import, and then we've got the live sync or D5 Lite plugin, right? So I'm going to go over here to import. So the first method I'm going to show you is the direct import method. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and you can go ahead and download this file. It's going to be in the files tab, and let's go ahead and click that. You're going to see that it's a SketchUp file. I'm going to hit open. And now what's going to happen is we've moved from the object outliner to this imported tab. Okay. So what it's doing is it's importing the actual file into D5 render. It's going to live here. If I left click once, it's going to load. And now it's essentially on my cursor. As I move the cursor around, it moves as well. If I left click once, it gets dropped in place. And now, if you're an architect working with many, many different files, you're probably wondering, well, this is kind of like in the middle of nowhere. Shouldn't I be using some sort of origin system? And yeah, you definitely should. If you go over here to sync coordinates, this will match the coordinates of your source software. I always recommend doing this just in case you start bringing in other models that kind of fall in place. I'll give you a really good example. If I import the sister project to this, and you don't have to do this, this is just an example, and I go ahead and place it, you see it's in the middle of nowhere. If I hit sync coordinates, it's now right across the street. And you'll see that the terrain is cutting through the model. All we have to do is hit object and go to terrain, and that will go away. So you see how it fit in there? That's why we use sync coordinates. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, get this out of the way. And now I want to talk to you about the live sync version. Because like I was saying earlier, this is frozen. So if I were to go into SketchUp and let's say, raise the parapet or change the material, this will not change, okay? This will only change if I right click the model and hit replace from local or reload. Use reload if you don't change the file name, it sits in the same folder path. Use replace from local if you change the path or the name. Let's say you call it version 1, version 2. Then you do replace from local. If it's the same file that you're just saving, you hit reload, right? So there's a time and place for frozen geometry and live sync geometry. Live sync's good if you're designing and you want to render at the same time. If you're just rendering, this is totally fine too. Comes out to the same exact thing. So now just to show you how a live sync plugin works, and this is true for Rhino as well. It's the same exact workflow. Revit is similar, but it's slightly different. But once you learn it in one software, it's the same exact thing. The only difference is right now, SketchUp has D5 Lite and it has D5 Render Sync. So if I were to hit this, connect to D5 Render, what's going to happen is it's going to ask me, do I want to replace the model in here or create a new link? I want to create a new link. And now it's going to start synchronizing this. And watch this. As I move in SketchUp, it also moves in D5 Render. If I were to go ahead and let's say model a box, right? I'll do some push and pull. It'll also appear there, right? So this is the benefit of live sync, right? The other way, if I were to save this, then I'd have to go in, right click, reload, and so on, okay? So you can continue using any method that you want, if you want live sync or frozen. I'm gonna be continuing with the frozen method just in case a viewer does not have SketchUp, okay? But again, my point here is it doesn't matter. It comes out to the same thing. Materials get read the same way. As you can see, we've got our pink here. It gets brought up there. Materials do not matter, okay? All the same thing. So I'm going to exit this and hit no. And the cool thing about D5 being a standalone piece of software is that synced model still lives here, right? I don't actually need SketchUp or Rhino open. It's here for when I want to update it, live sync it. And I know it's a live sync model because I see this little arrow guy right here on the icon, right? So I'm going to hit unlock and I'm just going to delete this. To do that, all I have to do is hit non-live sync mode, disconnect, and then I can delete it. What's nice is it makes it like kind of hard to delete things by accident, and that wasn't done by accident. So now that we've got this in here, let's save our project and then we'll move into materials. Let's go over here. We hit file, save as, and I'll just call this D5 Academy project. Perfect. And we see that there. And what's cool is if you were to go to open launcher, you'll actually see it right here. This is the most recent project. So you can always come back to this and it'll be easy to find. Hey, just wanted to pop in and say, if you've been enjoying this course so far, I highly recommend you join the ArchViz Academy. This is my premium learning platform where I've got dozens of hours of content. This course you're watching now, I actually have a structured version right here. So every single video is its own mini video with its own companion notes and downloadables. It's a much easier way to digest all this. You can ask questions on each video. Makes it a little bit easier to kind of go through all this. You're currently watching the free version, but the ArchViz Academy actually offers the ability to post renderings for feedback from your peers and myself. Here's some great images that one of our student Luca did. Phenomenal, beautiful renderings, and we can have a conversation and offer feedback so you can improve yourself. Here's some great examples from Hillary. There's homework in the Academy that you can go and create yourself, and we're just in there helping everyone improve and get better. It's a great resource, and I'm so proud of what the community's become. If you've been enjoying this free course, I do want you to know that I offer a pro level of educational content with dozens of hours of videos to help you become a better ArchViz artist. We cover AI, business, and everything D5 render related. As you can see, our students have been loving this, and I structure this like a college course where I'm your professor, you take the lessons, you post your renderings, and I give you feedback so you can improve. It's an extremely comprehensive course. You can see every single module that's included in this. We've got interior and exterior exercises, and we cover everything you need to know to start making money in ArchViz. This is an easy way for you to meet other ArchViz artists, but also a way for you to build a strong portfolio and get feedback and mentorship from me. Here are some amazing renderings that students have done directly in this course, and I've been so proud of all the different results. Our community is global. We have architects, students, interior designers, landscape designers, engineers, you name it. Anyone in AEC is in here. And if this is your first time meeting me, my name is Andy Crisoforo. I am a certified D5 render instructor and a licensed architect. So that is the lens I see ArchViz in. I've been in ArchViz for the past 15 years, and in the past several years, I've been focusing solely on teaching professionals how to learn D5 render and implement it into their business. And that is the foundation for everything we teach. We also teach AI and business, anything related to that. The Academy has project files that you can download. We usually use SketchUp, and this is completely asynchronous, so you can learn at your own pace. And you don't need any experience with D5 render. I teach you all the fundamentals, and I make sure I'm always updating the content and adding new lectures and exercises. So if any of this seems interesting, be sure to click a locked area on the space for a special discount to join. Hope to see you in the Academy. Please continue to enjoy the rest of this free course. Thank you again. All right, now that our scene is imported into D5, let's talk about adding materials. There's a couple things I like to do before I start applying materials to make our lives a little bit easier. And I also want to explain the logic of how materials work via your source modeling app and D5, kind of like that relationship. So let's talk about it. Right now, I've got my scene right here. You can see that this is all in shade. Generally speaking, when I do materials, I want it to be in the sunlight. Think about, if you're an architect or interior designer, you always take those samples outside and you view it in the sunlight. It's the same thing here. You always want to work in the sunlight, so you make sure you're seeing it in its true light, literally. So what I like to do is I head over to the environment tab and I just play with my little sun dial over here. And I make sure I've got it in the right spot. You can always play with the north offset. And if you're feeling really fancy, you can even plug in longitude, latitude, month, day. We'll cover this later in the lighting videos, but just make sure you've got sunlight and you can actually see, we've all worked in the dark, and it's not great. So you want to make sure you can actually see what you're doing. Then the next thing, you'll kind of see that I've got this like flat kind of perspective. I kind of find it annoying when I'm working in it. So what I like to do is I head over to the camera, and I'm just going to lower this to something a little bit more natural, like 23, 18 to 25. That way I can see a little bit more, feels a little bit more natural, and it doesn't feel so squished. Okay. Basically, when you raise the focal length, you're essentially kind of like zooming in, if that makes sense. You see that? And it kind of flattens your overall scene. So we don't want that, right? I'm going to stay somewhere around here just so I can see everything. Then what I like to do is think about the materials that I've got in my scene. So now I want to talk about the relationship of materials between your source modeling app and D5. So we've got some materials here already, and we've got some basic ones. If I were to hit I on my keyboard or click this guy, I've got the material picker. And you notice as I hover over different materials, they start to highlight. What's happening is anything that shares the same material will collapse and be editable at once. So just as an example, you don't have to do this. Let me show you what happens here. You see how this is all changing at once? Same thing here. This is all changing at once because it's the same exact material. So if I were to go over to SketchUp for this example, and this is true for Revit and Rhino and all that, this is my metal material, right? And this is my cladding stone wall material. If I were to go over here, hit I on my keyboard, that's that cladding stone wall material, and that's that metal material. See how the name is coming over? So if it shares the same material, it will come over. So the question I get a lot is, well, Andy, let's say, for example, this band right here should be a different material. What do I do? All you have to do is go to your source app and just paint that as a different material, and it'll come through as its own different material. It won't be collapsed into this. That's my point. Okay. I feel like a lot of people get hung up on that. So I just wanted to, clear the room on that, on how we do that. So now that we figured that out, what I always like to do is just kind of survey the scene. I use these really loud and obnoxious colors. I tend not to use textures for the most part, just because this to me looks like it's complete, right? If I use something, very vibrant, then I know, hey, Andy, I got to go back to this. I actually have to apply something. When you're using actual real textures, it kind of blends in, but I'll show you why we use the real texture here in the next video to kind of explain the AI workflow that D5 has here. But anyways, we've got all these loud colors, and in the next video, I'm going to show you how to apply some of the D5 asset library materials to it, import your own, as well as modify existing materials brought in. So now let's talk about how we convert these ugly colors into photorealistic materials. What I typically do, and what's true for like 90% of my materials in any scene, I'm leveraging the D5 asset library. It's really that good. Like any material I need, it's generally here. So I'll give you a really good example. I'll go over here, and let's say I want to start editing this metal, right? So I can go over here, make sure I'm under online material, and I'm going to click metal. Here, I've got all the different metals here. I could even go down a subcategory, or I could type in a very specific material. So I want a brass. All I have to do is type brass, and look at that. I generally like the look of this guy, mirror brass. So I'm just going to click that. That's going to download. You can see here, this has been downloaded. And now I'm going to apply it over here. Again, notice how it's highlighting all the same materials. So when I left click, it's going to apply everywhere. So now that we've got that here, let's start talking about what all these settings are. You'll notice that the user interface has kind of changed over here. We moved from environment to inspector. When something is selected or active, you'll have this inspector tab. So if I'll click off, you see how that's gone? But if I select my material, it's back. So first off, we've got some settings here. This is going to let you duplicate the material. This is going to let you add it to your own local library, which is really handy for those materials you're using all the time. This, if you're on a team plan, will add it to your team server so you could share with your coworkers. Here you can batch import PBR textures. You can use AI to generate texture maps for you. We'll talk about that with our stone. And then this is just resetting it to the original import material. Then down here, we've got templates. For the most part, you'll be working in the custom template. These are great if you need to use like water or grass materials. Generally speaking, we're going to be using the custom template for the most part, but there are additional templates for creating your own grass, or car paint, or water, or transparent materials. So within here, we've got our base color. Now, the base color is the actual tint of the material. It's not the base color map, okay? The base color map, this is the actual texture, okay? The base color is a tint or a hue. So if I click that and I start dragging around, you see how I'm tinting? This is a very easy way for you to hue something, right? So I'm just gonna hit Control Z and cancel that out. Then we've got our normal map. So if I were to zoom in just to help explain this and start to crank up my normal map, you'll see I've got all these bumps start to emerge. So that's the normal map working. Normal map is going to add all those little bumps and ridges to a material. This is, a metal. I'm going to keep this really low. 0.2 is totally fine. Then there's specular. Specular is the intensity of the highlight of the reflection, which won't come through in metals. I'll show you that in a different material. Then we've got roughness. This is basically how smooth or rough a surface is right now. So if I were to crank this down to 0, you see how I see the clouds perfectly? It's like a mirror-like surface. Well, 0 is basically a flat, fully reflective, no roughness setting. 1 is super, super rough, and this is what's going to help dull up the metal. Then we've got the metallic setting. Is it metal or not? So this is 0, kind of looks plasticky. Once I crank it to 1, it means it's fully metallic. We see those metallic tints come through, right? So we've got all that. Then we've got ambient occlusion. I'll show you this in a different material, but this is going to help add some context shadows within a map. Then we've got emissive. If this were an object to glow, we'll do that for some interior lights. And then we've got our texture map here. This isn't going to be super apparent because it's a metal, but you can kind of see, you see all these like little scuff marks here? We can actually control the scale of that. So if I set it to 12, it's going to be super, super teeny. You won't even be able to tell that. Set it to 0.01. It's going to be really, really big. It's really hard to see, but I'll show you that in something like a brick. So I'm going to set that to 1 for now. And I'll go through these in the next material. Then we've got right down here under advanced, round corner. Now round corner is very important for metals because if you look at any corner here, you see how we have this sharp 90-degree corner? Well, if I click this, it's going to actually add a nice soft edge to that. That's something you actually don't even need to model. You can play with the radius here and it will change that. This is great because modeling this is a total pain. So I've got that there and that looks great, right? So this metal is in a really good spot. Feel free to tint it however you want, whatever color, play with those settings until you get it how you want. Generally speaking, I like to get my materials into like a good spot and then I'll go back and then tweak them just to see how everything kind of fits together, right? So there are a couple of settings I said I wanted to review with something with like a little bit more texture. So let me go down here to a road surface and I'll go over to assets and I'm going to search for asphalt. And I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to use asphalt 3. And I'm going to paste this in. And you can see it's going to change all the road here. So now that I've got all this texture here, I can start showing you what these guys are. So the UV, if I were to show you this again, you see that? How it's like super, super small and tiny. If I change this back to 0.6, it gets bigger, okay? So that's going to control basically the size of your texture map, right? Then we've got offset. This is if you want to move the texture around, right? And then we've got rotate if you need to rotate the texture. I'm going to keep this at 0. I don't need that. And you'll notice that we actually have another channel here. This is height. This is for displacement. You can see I'm in a different template. This is going to give us one more extra channel. And this is going to let you drive the geometry a little bit higher than normal. A normal map will give you all these little details for the rocks here. You see that? But a height map, look at that. It's actually going to drive the height of an object. If I turn on true displacement and give it a second, look at that. It's like actually moving the geometry. So this is huge because this is an easy way to mimic depth in materials without actually having to go and model that. I'm going to turn this off for now because I don't need that much, just a simple road, right? But generally speaking, I don't even need displacement on this. I can actually just go here and switch it to custom and lose the height map And now I get these guys right here, triplanar and UV randomizer. These guys will only appear in custom. So it's really important if you want them to make sure you switch. So what do these guys do? If I hit triplanar, it's not gonna look like much has changed, but what this does is it applies a world scale to the surface. You ever have a model where you've got a scale on a piece of geometry, let's say it's at scale 12, and then you've got it at scale 6 on another mesh, and they're all different sizes and they look distorted. Well, this is going to unify this. So I generally have this on for most of the time. It's very rare that I don't have it on. That way it just unifies everything and I make sure it's not distorting any of my materials. Then I've got this guy here called UV randomizer. You see right here, we kind of see the actual texture. Kind of see the box here. Well, UV randomizer is going to help make it seamless. Look at that. It's starting to blend and mix around the texture to give us that really nice seamless look. So look at that. You can't even tell that it was a non-seamless material. So we've got all that. I don't necessarily need round corner here because we don't see the corner in any segments. And I can go ahead and tint the base color if I want. If I want it to be darker or lighter, I can do that right here. So I'll leave that here for now. I don't mind that. And I'm going to move on to the next material. We've got this sidewalk over here. So again, I'm going to head over to assets and I'm going to type in road surface. I could definitely go ahead and like manually go through here, but just to save everyone some time, I've got some predefined materials that I really like using. So I'm going to click this here. And now you can kind of see what I was talking about with the distortion with why we need triplanar. You see how this is kind of going one way and then that's going another way? Well, triplanar is going to go ahead and fix that. Again, I'm in displacement, so I need to go to custom and then I'm going to get that back. I turn on triplanar and now it evens out all the rotations and everything. So I've got that there. I'm going to turn on my UV randomizer and look at how much better that looks. And I'll even turn on the round corner just to help soften that edge. There we go. I can go and tint everything, but again, generally happy with this. I do like this material a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it and place it on this purple here. So the cool thing is, you see how these are being picked up as two different materials? Well, what that means is if I left click here and I tint this guy slightly, it's not going to affect this guy. They are not twins, okay? They are their own thing. There is no copying between them. They are completely different. If you want them to change at the same time, go back to your source software and make them the same material, right? So this is going to give us a little bit more flexibility, right? So big fan of this. Then I can, if I want, just to point this out here, under base color map, you can go to advanced settings and you can actually like desaturate a material map right from here. So you see how it's like much grayer than before. So it had a warmth to it. Well, here I can actually just desaturate it. So this stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. So I can make it brighter, just like that, and I can desaturate it. I'm even going to do the same thing with the sidewalk here. I'll desaturate just a bit, just to pull that warmth out. Okay, so I like this. I'm going to save, Control S, get a little paranoid. And now let's talk about this material here. So this was an imported texture. So this came from SketchUp. Same thing will happen in Revit or Rhino. Imported materials will come through if you allow it. But there's some things we want to do to it, because if I hit I on my material here, you'll notice it's got no detail here. It's got no information. So there's a couple things we can do to prep this. What I always like to do is you can go to the texture enhancer here. You can boost the texture of this. This will actually sharpen the texture. This is great for, any, small little material samples you get online where it's like a low quality image. You can go ahead here, hit Ultra HD texture, and it's going to sharpen that and double the resolution. I'm going to go ahead and hit confirm. And if you want, you can also make it seamless as well. So you don't even need to go to Photoshop. This, because it's a tile, it doesn't make sense to make it seamless. It would get all distorted, but that functionality is there. It'd give you this like little chart here and detect any seams, which is pretty neat. So once I have that here, I want to populate these maps. All I have to do is go over to AI generate texture maps, and that is going to think for a moment and populate. So now if you're missing this, just know that this is part of the Pro plan. This is why I'm a big fan of like paying for the Pro sub. I think it's like a great deal. You're getting all these like AI functionality built into the render software. I now have a normal map, a roughness map, and AO. And if I right click any of these and go to file location, it's going to open up the actual maps. Look at this. Look at that. It just did that in no time at all. Doing generate height map and AO. So AO is that ambient occlusion I was talking about. It's adding all this shadow detail in here, in between the actual blocks. So watch this. I lower this. You see how much lighter the lines got? But if I do that, it's going to help darken it. Look at that. And that took no time at all, right? So we've got that. Then I said earlier that I was going to explain what specular is. So watch this. If I were to increase specular, pay attention to what's going on here. This is boosting the power of the reflection. So you see how much lighter it gets, but when I lower it, it gets darker. 0.3, generally speaking, is like a really good default value. If you're unsure what to do, leave it at 0.3, but you have that as control, right? So that's really nice. And now you have all these maps driving it, making it more photorealistic. So very, very powerful. Highly recommend you use this this AI function because I think it's a huge time saver. So I could put on triplanar if I want, but this was already mapped in SketchUp, so I think it's totally fine. UV randomizer I don't want because look at what's going to happen, right? And then round corner, I'll turn that on just for these edges right here. Okay. Then if you're curious what limit color bleeding is, you see in this reflection here, I'm getting this like pink and everything. If you ever have like really loud colors and like the light is bouncing and it's bleeding onto another surface, you can actually just go here to limit color bleeding and it's going to start turning that off. As you can see, it's already, stopped on this area. So it's not sending that much pink over there, but it happens in the real world. It's like a physically based thing. So, it's not really an issue. It's just more for artistic control, right? So then next we've got a couple materials over here. We've got this tile over here. So for this tile, what I want to do is go over here to assets and just real quick, you see this nice little reflection here? Well, that's from that round corner. So it's actually catching the light on that edge. So that's why you turn that on. That was not planned. That was very, very convenient. But now for this material here, let's do some shopping around. I'm going to go over here to ceramic tile and I'm going to look through here. I'm going to go with this travertine. I feel like this is a nice look and I'll place that there. Go left click that. And I feel like it goes nicely with the rest of all of our stones. So I'm happy with that. That's looking good. Then we've got this guy over here. This is kind of like a little stone slab, right? So let's add something there. Go over to my assets. And let's go and look for stone. So you can see I'm grabbing everything from the D5 library. Like I'm not doing anything crazy here. I don't need to go like shopping and buy materials and everything. I've got it all here. So let's see. So you can definitely choose your own, let me just see what this looks like. And we'll place that there. And I don't mind that. It's kind of like a nice contrast to the warm stone. So I'm going to go here. And the only thing I'm really going to change, the texture looks good and everything. I'm just going to get that round corner on. There we go. Because when the stone is honed and everything, right, it's going to have that nice rounded edge. It's not going to be, 90-degree corner. So I've got that. And I want to fix this, add some lights. We also want to add some materials here. And then we'll even talk about how to handle like the grass. That's what this red guy is, right? So take a pause there. Finish up your materials, tweak the settings as needed, and then we'll move into the second phase of exterior materials. And make sure you save. Now let's tackle the rest of our materials. So right up here, I'm thinking this is going to be like a roof deck area. So all I'm going to do is go to assets, and I'm going to search for tile floor. And I'm going to get all these really nice planks. I'm going to go with this one, and let's see how that looks. I'll place that. I think I want something with a wider plank. So let's try this. Yeah, I think that's good. I don't like how repeatable this guy is right here. So all I'm going to do is just boost the scale here. So it's not as apparent. I'm going to drop this down to 0.7. And this is going to be covered with furniture and everything. So it's not going to be too visible. So now that we've got that here, I'm going to go and fix this guy right over here. This was a SketchUp imported material. So we could do the same thing where we, run it through the optimizer here and generate texture maps or grab something from the asset library. So you've got a couple options here. I think what I'm going to do here is just tint it a little bit so it's a little bit darker. And I'm going to go ahead and use AI to generate new textures for this. That way we get, some normal map and everything coming through. And most importantly, we always have our round corner on. There we go. Look at that. Beautiful. But you can see how fast you can work leveraging AI like this, right? So then up here, we've got a bunch of materials we'll probably never see unless we're doing like an aerial. So I think for this, we'll just do kind of like a black membrane thing here. And then this, we'll just do like a painted material. So I'm going to head over to my assets and I'm going to go over to outdoor ground. Let's go with just like a simple asphalt, just like a nice, simple dark color here. Just with like a little bit of texture here. And as usual, I'm going to go in, I'll turn on my triplanar and UV randomizer, and I'll probably just make the scale a little bit bigger. Go 0.4. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, and then for this wall over here, let's go with something simple, maybe like a wall tile. Let's see, got some brick here. Yeah, let's try fair face concrete. Let's just paste that there. Now that's a little too fancy. We're gonna blow our budget up here. Yeah, let's go with this. And this is like one of those things nobody's ever gonna see because it's, think about it. You're not gonna see that. All right, perfect. So we've got all those materials. Now let's go down here and we've got some soffit materials here. So for this, we could do like a wood soffit or we can go with like a painted look. If you wanted paint, you could just go to paint, literally type that in. And I generally use white wall paint a lot. This is like my go-to. You can see I favorited it. So if you click on the heart, what happens is you can now filter by your favorites and only those would appear. So if you get comfortable with the material library, I can actually go really quick if you have all these favorites ready to go. So I like this, and I'm going to just paste this on top of my light here, and I'm going to click it one more time, but I actually want this light to be on. So I'm going to hit I on my keyboard, click this, and I'm going to make it emissive. So now that it's emissive, I can choose a color or temperature. So temperature like via Kelvin. So if I want 6,500 or I want something warmer like 3,000, you see how the light's changing, or something cooler. I'm totally fine with like a 5K light, and I can play with the intensity here. You see how it's beginning to glow? These do contribute to the overall, light of the scene. So the more intense it is, it will actually add lights. I do this for like a lot of like secondary lights that are just in the background where I don't necessarily need them to light up the whole space, but I do want it to look like they are there. So now that I've got that there, if I want the actual rim around the light fixture to be a different color, I can just go here and tint it just so slightly. There you go. So we've got all this extra detail all using the same material. That's why I was showing you that we can easily duplicate it or paste it. And we're just doing these minor tweaks where they're changing the template, or changing a setting or a color or emissiveness. And there we go. I'm gonna grab this asphalt again, gonna hit I, and I'm gonna paste it in here. And we'll also paste it. Yeah, that's good. That's totally fine. Okay. This is going to be like some sort of vegetation. These guys are all going to be like building sites or plots. So all we have to do here is we could just put something generic. It could be another asphalt or road covering. I'm going to grab this guy and duplicate that just so there's some differential between that. And then this, if we want it to be like a park area or a courtyard area, all we have to do is go over to assets and we can find some vegetation for that. So that's outdoor ground. And if you want to do, like pavers or something, that's going to be in here. You could do a mix between, it's like a growing tile. You see this with a pavement tile and grass coming through. Or if you want like actual grass or something, or, like dirt, you can go with natural raw, switch over to the grass, and then you'll see a different couple options here. Like if I were to grab this and paste this, zoom in, we'll try wild grassland. And this guy, I generally use a lot, as well as these guys, grassland. So I go ahead and click that. And what I like to do for these is I'll go in, I'll switch them to custom again, and go triplanar, UV randomizer, and look at how much better that looks. And then I'll just play with the scale so it's a little bit bigger. So it's not the most well-maintained lawn here, but at least it looks natural, right? Then we do 0.3. And I'll show you how to add grass in a future video, all dedicated to like actually placing entourage. So now that we've got this here, I do like the overall look of it. So I might save this guy to local just so I have it in the future. So just as practice, let's go over here, let's hit add to local. And now where does this go? If we go over to assets and local, we're gonna see it right here. So that's pretty handy. So if I want to reuse this elsewhere, right? I just click that, click somewhere else, and I'm ready to go. Pretty handy, right? So I've got that there. I like the look of that. You know, we'll have trees and everything planted here, but now these guys, these like little planter boxes, right? What we could do here is probably just do like some dirt, right? Something that's got, you know, no grass. I'm going to go back to online, back to material, and we just want something a little dirt-like. So I'm going to go with this. We'll see this. And I like that it's got some leaves in there as well. Yeah, exactly. So that's perfect. All right, great. So we've got that there. Gonna do a little fly around. And we've got this fence here. Fence, we could probably do like a wood plank kind of thing. So we could go either to wall tiles, or we could just search for wood. We've got plenty of bricks here. Let's see if we've got anything for wood in here. And those aren't too bad. Which I kind of like these. These are kind of fun. And you guys can choose, you know, whichever one you want, you know, up to you guys. But I'm going to go over to here and let's go back to that tile floor. Yeah. And you could do something like this. Oh, actually, this could be like a good fence. Or something like this that looks weathered. Yeah. You can go with that and then make the board really big. I'm just going to go here. That's one option. Yeah. And then you can go ahead and, you know, desaturate it, whatever you want to do. Yeah, so that's fine by me. Again, that's not the key of the key view of the rendering, right? So we've got all that. The metal, I might want to tweak a little bit, just because it's like super shiny. I mean, it looks really good, but it's like too shiny. So let's play a little bit with these settings here. If I go ahead and boost the normal a little bit, it's gonna help kind of scuff up this material. Okay. It's looking good. Yeah, you can see right here, all those little details from the normal. If I were to just go 0 and it goes away, if I got a 0.9, they're gonna come through. I can also, because I can kind of visualize them here, start playing with the size of our stretch here. So let's say we go with 0.2. You can see the scratches, right? You see how much bigger they are now? See that? We'll go with like 0.5. We got our triplanar. We got our UV randomizer on. And that's looking better. Feeling better about that one. You can also go with like a more like a dirty type of brass if you want, but I generally like this kind. All right, so that looks good for the exterior. I think that's a good stopping point for exterior. Let's just make sure everything's in here, flying around. And again, this is why I use those loud colors, just to make sure nothing sticks out. So take this time, you know, wrap up your materials, fine tune them, you know, tweak them. If you want to do things differently, you know, use different colors or anything, totally fine. In the next video, we'll hop into the interior. So now before we go into the interior, let's handle the glass. That way we can see into our building. The glass and the interiors I feel like have a very like close, important relationship to each other. So this is what I usually do. I'll head over to assets and then I'll go over to glass, and I usually start with normal glass here, and I'll go ahead and paste this here. So I'm going to paste this. And now what this is going to let us do is actually see into the project, right? In my opinion, it basically frees up the interior. So this is going to use the transparent template. Again, this is different from custom. This is going to let you customize the normal, how bright the reflections are, right? You see that? The refraction of the glass. And then if the glass should have thickness or not. This is important because if you're modeling glass as a single face, toggle this on and you don't need to model the thickness. If you're modeling thickness, then leave it alone. This is going to help calculate refraction correctly, so make sure you're playing with that. Then roughness is basically how reflective the glass is, right? So 0.01 I think is good because it kind of adds some imperfections. And then opacity, if you want to darken the glass or not. Basically, is it see-through or not? I'm gonna leave this at 0 just for the sake of being able to see into the interior. We can go and customize that later once we're about to do our final renderings, right? So let's go over here so we can actually see our lobby, right? So a couple things we've got to do. We've got to do our floor here. We've got to add maybe some stone here. We can improve this material over here on the walls, and we can spruce up this desk here. So right now it's kind of hard to see in our lobby. So what I'm going to do is go over to environment, and I'm just going to play with our light settings so we can actually get some light in here. So I'm going to just do this, and there we go. Again, I just want to be able to see what I'm doing. So I like the desk materials to kind of like match the building. So I'm just going to grab this mirror brass. I'll paste it there. Why not? The wood looks good. So all I'm going to do is just go ahead, do my AI tool here, and then we'll do some round corners, and you can see like how fast you can start moving here. There we go. That looks great. Maybe I play with the roughness. So there's some gloss in it, right? You see that? Do that. I like that look. And now let's get a floor material. So I'm going to go over to assets, and I'm going to plug in terracotta like that. And I generally like these guys. Paste this, and look at that. That looks great. Love the reflection and everything. And now for here, I kind of want like a stone, like a cobble kind of stone. So for this stack stone, I'm going to head over to wall tile, and I'm going to scroll down here, and I kind of want something like this, like a cultured stone type of thing, but I want it to be kind of in the color of the woods here. So like, I don't mind these guys or these like bricks here. Let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to grab this guy, and we'll paste this here. Okay, and they look a little too rough. So let's see if we've got anything a little bit more polished. Yeah, this is looking better. Yeah, let's try this. So what's interesting is I was expecting this to be lighter, but I actually kind of like the contrast. Like it almost matches the desk. I think all I'm going to do is actually go ahead and go to base color and darken it. It's funny how that kind of works out, where you're expecting one thing, and then because you're doing this like shopping experience, it kind of changes your mind. But feel free to choose whatever you want. If you want to go lighter, totally fine. My job here is just to show you the ropes, right? So then over here for our wood, let's see what our options are. We can head over to wood, and now we've got all these fine grains here. We've got cedar, we've got dirty pine, fir, European birch. We've got a lot of options here. And like, this material isn't bad, the one that's mapped from SketchUp, but if you want to do something special, go ahead. We could try poplar out, see what that looks like. And poplar is a little, actually I kind of like that. It's like picking up the colors of the desk. That's interesting. I don't mind that. I could even like flip it. So if I go over to rotate and then type in 90, it's going to go vertical. So that's one option. You could also do like a red oak if you don't want the knots as much. And this is going to be more of like a plank. So we got a couple options here. So let's just keep trying. Say yellow maple wood. I don't mind that. Or you could go for like a stone, like if you want to do like a travertine, right? If you want to do something completely different. But then I feel like it's too much stone because you got like stone on the floor. You could also have stone on the walls. So I actually don't mind that. I feel like the pock marks are a little obscene. That's much better. Oh, that's fun. All right, that works for me. And I can go in here and I can dial in the roughness. I want it to shine a little bit more. You can see that right there. So that looks great. And again, this is one of those things, like once we have this in a good spot, we can tweak it. The whole point is just to get the materials here. So now for this lamp, let's add some easy materials here. We can add some more brass up here, if that's, the look we're going for. We can go with maybe something like this. We'll go with like a more orangier brass. Apply that. Perfect. And then let's just fine tune some of these materials. This one does look a little rough, right? So in this instance, where is this roughness coming from? It looks like it could be coming from the base color map. So what we could do is actually remove the contrast of these marks and the actual metal. If you do this, you can see it's removing the contrast. See that? So that's an easy way if you don't like the look of like a knot or like a mark, to just kind of make that go away. Or you could just use something completely different, like rusty brass or brass, and you don't really have as much of that. See that? It kind of all looks samey, but this is super rough, right? Like if I play with the roughness, then at least it's got a little bit more of a sheen. So my point is, you've got options here. Don't feel like you're stuck, and you have to do exactly what we're showing here. So I've got that. Let's turn on randomizer, triplanar, round corner, and there we go. And then for these guys, for these light fixtures, we could just make them all emissive. So if I hit the eyedropper on the light here and go ahead and duplicate, I can essentially make these guys light up. Or I can make it glass. You have that as an option, right? So you can do it like that. I'm going to lower this. I just like the idea of it like kind of being on. All right, so we've got that. I'm just going to wrap up this material over here. I grab this and paste that there. Another handy trick, if you have a very specific asset or material that you want, how does that work? If you want to import your own, all you have to do is just right here where it says base color map, you just swap this out. You just click this guy, it's going to ask you for a map, and then you go ahead and you pick it. Like that's it. That's how you get your own materials in. Nothing crazy. You can also use AI material snap, where you upload an image and then you select the material you want, hit generate, and D5 is going to go ahead and look in its own library as well as generate a material based on what it sees there. Again, this is a nice, awesome feature that's part of the AI package within the Pro plan. One of the reasons I really like it, I love being able to use all these different options depending on what I'm doing, because it happens all the time. A client's like, hey, I want this. And you're like, well, how am I going to get this material? Well, you just upload it here and it's going to think about it and then hopefully give you the right thing. There you go. Look at that. So if I wanted this, I could add it to local, or I could go ahead and just apply this just to show you. If I were to go put it on this this wall over here, boom, there you go. Look at that. And it made that up. Like, that's the crazy thing. I'm just going to undo that, but you've got options is my point. Then we've got these curtains over here that look a little insane. Like they're this like metallic film. So I'm going to go over here to assets. And if you go under fabric, you've got a bunch of options. Let me clear this out. We could go with something like a beige linen, paste that there, and that's going to help fix all that. And now with these guys, you could even do something like a subsurface scattering. And what this is going to let you do is actually have it kind of glow when light's coming in. So watch this. If I increase this and I change the color and I get some light in here, watch what's going to happen. This is kind of like the same material as like an ear, where light enters and it bounces around. That's what subsurface scattering is. Let me just rotate this. There we go. And watch this. If I were to just lower this, you see that? See how it's like glowing within it? So you've got that as an option as well. And you can basically fine tune the color of that as well. So that's really handy. Just gonna get rid of the color. So I'm gonna go to more settings and just desaturate it. So it's a little bit grayer. And you can go ahead and play with the actual scale. There we go. Triplanar makes it nice and even. And that's gonna be good enough. And if you notice, it feels much darker in here. Well, this is the actual auto exposure kicking on and off. So if you go over here to camera, you can play with that here. You can toggle it on and off, and you can even add to auto exposure so you can easily see in the dark as well. So if you notice that, that's what's going on. But it looks like for the most part, we got most of our materials all dialed in. So in the next set of videos, I'm going to show you how to start adding in entourage like vegetation and people and furniture. And then after that, we'll be playing with the time of day, and then we'll start rendering out everything. So if you made it this far, please continue tweaking your materials. If you're, unhappy with the quality of a material or an angle, go ahead and fine tune it. Now that I'm looking at this material, maybe I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to hop in over there and just darken it. I think it's just one of those things that it's never like finished in a way, and it's totally fine to like revisit. So spend the time and dial it in, and I'll see you in the next video. So now that our materials are in a good spot, let's talk about lighting in D5. So when it comes to artificial lighting, I'm talking about like the sun and everything. There's about 3 different systems in D5. The first system right over here is called Geo and Sky. So Geo and Sky, this is the dynamic sun system. So literally I'm moving this dial around and it's changing the time of day. I can also plug in a time of day. So I want 6:22, I can plug that in. The cool part about this is you have a lot of flexibility. I can play with the north offset. I can even plug in the longitude and latitude of my project, as well as the month and day. So I use this option if I need to do a sun study, where I need to say like, hey, this is what it's going to look like on the equinox. This is what it's going to look like in 2 years from now. This is what it's going to look like when it's 4 p.m. You know what I mean? So that's when I say sun study, that's what I'm talking about. Below these settings, we're going to get some extra controls. This is actually going to control the characteristics of the sun. So intensity is literally the brightness of the sun. You don't want this too high. Generally speaking, I have this very low. Then we've got sun disk radius, and this controls the sharpness or the softness of a shadow. So if I were to fly over here, and you see this wall, we've got kind of like a sharp edge here, and then it softens up. Well, that is all dialed in from this guy. If I crank this up, it softens it, almost like it's an overcast day and there's lots of clouds and it's diffusing the light. If this were to go down, you see how it's perfectly sharp? This doesn't really happen in the real world, so avoid 0. Okay, that's a little too harsh. I like it somewhere around here where, it softens up towards the end here, but sharp where it starts. Then we've got moonlight controls and everything, but this is a daytime rendering, so we're not too concerned with that. And then part of the whole Geo and Sky system is the dynamic weather system, right? So if I were to just come out here, what's new in D5 3.0 is we actually have a whole new selection for our clouds. So right here, I can choose the different presets. Okay, see how it's changing the profile of the sky? And now here's the cool thing about all this. You see how these sliders are changing? Well, this is dynamic, so I can actually go from one template to another in theory, right? If I boost this is going to make it look more overcast. I can even add more mid-level clouds. So now it's custom, but this is looking more like one of these guys, right? So although I started here, I can easily go there. My point is it's all customizable. Don't feel like you're stuck in one. Tweak and play around. So you've got a lot of control here with how your clouds look, and you can really dial in everything about your sky. And again, this is the dynamic system, so you can literally dial in what the sun looks like, what the sky looks like, what the cloud looks like. That's all in here. You can also add in fog, so that's going to help with your foreground and your background. I can literally crank this up to add more density for my fog. See how that's changing there? I can even change the color of the fog tint, right? As well as the height. So you see how that's rising? And if I want to go really crazy, I can actually turn on volumetric scattering, and you can see how we can like literally see the fog now. So that's like a nice little effect. This is also going to give you those God rays, which is really cool when you're looking at the sun. So the sun's somewhere over here. You see that? So that's going to come from this guy. So if you're trying to get that look, you need to have volumetric on. Then we've got wind and precipitation. Wind is cool because if there is a dynamic plant asset in here, it'll actually make it move. So let me just turn off the fog so you can see that. And I'm going to drop in a plant, and we'll talk more about plants in the upcoming module, but just so you see this, I go over to nature, and you want to make sure it's dynamic. So anything that's got this kind of little moving wind button, watch this. If I drop this in here, by default, it's going to do a little bit of swaying, like a natural sway. But when I crank on wind, and crank this up, you see how it's actually swaying? So that's kind of cool. That's only going to happen for these dynamic assets. And then next we've got precipitation. This is going to make it either rain or snow. So if I crank it more to the right, it's going to snow more. And it will add to the vegetation, which is really cool. You can even dial in the strength. So how much particles, the intensity of everything. I'll show you on rain as well. And you can control how many puddles you have for that wet look or for that snowy look. So you've got a lot of fun stuff in here. But again, this is all part of the dynamic system. You can easily toggle on and off with these buttons right there. And one thing I'll point out before I move on to the next set is you might notice my panel is a little bit wider than yours. Well, that's actually because in D5 3.0, you can control the width of your sidebar. So I like to just widen it up a bit so I can see things a little bit more comfortably. So if you notice that, that's why. So the next we've got custom. So if I head over here, custom is like in my opinion, kind of like a simplified version of Geo and Sky. As you can see here, I can toggle between custom daytime or custom night. We're getting the same intensity, we're getting the same sun disk radius, altitude, and azimuth, but we're missing out on the longitude and latitude, north offset, and all that. That is really just controlled here. So altitude is the position in the sky, and azimuth is the rotation, okay? So it's just a different language, and it just simplifies things. Like if you wanted nighttime, all you have to do is check mark this. And now you could easily play with the moonlight intensity, the sky intensity, the moon phasing. So you see that, how big it is. That's what this guy is, and how high it is. And because the clouds are all dynamic, it's literally changing the brightness of the clouds closest to the moon rather than the ones furthest from the moon. So what's nice about this is, yeah, you've got a lot more control and you can leverage the dynamic system. So if you need like pinpoint precision, go with Geo and Sky. If you just want something quick and dirty, go with a custom route. And then lastly, we have HDRI. So I'm gonna head over here. So HDRI, if you've ever done any sort of ArchViz, this is the traditional way that we light up our scenes. So what an HDRI is, think of it as a very high res image that is spread across the sphere of your sky. So this is one image, it's not dynamic, okay? Meaning the clouds aren't moving, right? It's literally one image on this sphere and it's plastered around. But you could see the realism wise, it looks so much sharper than the dynamic system. Just look at the overall light quality here. It looks much more impressive than before. It's literally lighting the scene with the shadow and light information of the HDRI. So this is my favorite, and this is usually what I use for final renders. The dynamic stuff is great for when you're testing, but when I want final quality, I usually go with this. And how this works is you've got a light setting, so that's literally going to control the skylight or the intensity, right? So you see as the sun gets brighter, my reflections get brighter, so I can dial that in, and then I can rotate. So as I'm rotating the HDRI, it's rotating the sun because the sun is tied to the image. So you see that? So that is the sun position. I can't change the height of it because it's baked into the image, okay? So very, very important. I can't tell it to be like an early morning sun because that's not the image. The image is a midday sun. If I want early morning, I need to change that HDRI and find that. And there we go, right over there. So just factor that in. If you want photorealism, go HDRI. If you want flexibility, go with the dynamic systems. So the other nice settings that we get here is we can play with the overall temperature of the scene. So I can warm it up or I can cool it down. See that? I tend to hang out somewhere around here. You can always right click to reset a value. So here it's at 6500, and I think that's a totally fine starting point. Then we can also override the HDRI with our own sun controller. So check this out. Notice how before I said you have to control the sun via the HDRI's rotation. Well, you can actually say, screw that, I'm just gonna go custom, and now I can plug in my own altitude and azimuth. So this is kind of like my own trick or hack because I'm able to get the quality of the HDRI, but I can control the sun however I like. But it is important that the sun's not visible in the back of your building and the sun's coming the other way. It would just break the illusion of the rendering we're trying to make here. So just pay attention to that. But this is like my typical setup. So now that we talked about the 3 environment modes, I want to show you some other features that we can use to get lighting much faster. So let's say you're in a rush and you don't want to dial in all the lighting parameters. Well, you can actually use what's called the D5 Studio or the AI atmosphere match tool to easily generate light setups. So check this out. If I go to Studio right here and I go to D5 Curated, these are presets from the D5 Creative team. I can actually just double click any of these and it's going to go ahead and load in those light setups. This is using an HDRI setup. This is all customizable. See, the sun is exposed and everything. And I can just tweak it as needed, right? I can rotate it, but I don't need to sit there and fine tune every single thing. I could easily click one of these and it'll move it over for me. So look at that. Again, it's all editable. Sometimes it'll be HDRI, sometimes it'll be Geo and Sky. But do know you've got this free, awesome resource that's just built into it, and it requires no time at all. Literally just requires you to use your eyeballs and say, okay, I like the look of it. Let me go with that. But I'm a big fan of it because it's customizable. When you start out, you don't know what every single setting does, and sometimes you just don't have the time. So it's good to kind of learn from the pros, see what their settings are, take it apart, and then apply your own kind of look and aesthetic to it. So here you can see, there's another one. Again, HDRI, it's just loading up different HDRIs. You can always load up your own by hitting Customize HDRI, or you could just use the default ones in here. Okay, so these will also bring in their own post-processing, and we'll talk more about this later, but under Effect, it will apply LUTs, it'll apply different exposure settings, different shadow settings. So it's not just lighting, it's kind of all these other features as well. Okay, so really important to note that there. The other way, if you want to speed up lighting, is to use the AI atmosphere match tool. And so this is built into the Pro plans and above. So if it's grayed out or not visible, that's why. So I can go to AI style transfer, hit snap current view, and now I can use a reference image or any image that I get right here that's built into the library. So let me just go for this overcast day. I want to match that. I hit generate. And then it's going to go ahead and basically rebuild the settings of that image in my own scene. This is great when a client's like, hey, I want this kind of vibe, or your design principle is like, hey, I saw this image on Pinterest or Instagram. Can we make it look like that? That's how you do this. Just plug it in and it'll literally just copy the settings for you. You don't need to sit there and kind of reverse engineer it. And look at that. We've got the look. We've got all the colors here. We can play with the strength and everything. So I can desaturate it a bit by lowering it here. Look at that. That took no time at all. So you've got a couple options. Just know you don't need to manually do everything by yourself. So just so we're all at the same starting point, let's switch over to this guy, exterior day, and then it's going to kind of clear out all our settings here. And I'm going to hop over to environment and just turn off that fog. And so what's cool about the lighting and everything is I can go over here to save a scene, and this is like a bookmark. This is going to preserve my physical camera location, as well as the time of day settings, visibility settings, you name it. So from here, I can actually do a study, and let's say, I don't want this daytime scene, I want another kind of look. I can make a new view, click another scene style, and I can update that and easily switch between the two. So that's kind of cool. So you could easily do like a day or night study, or you could just test for yourself different looks to see what makes the most sense for you. And then I can even lower the exposure here, update the scene here, and look at that. It will change the exposure. Again, everything is saved on a per image basis. So just note that. So in the next video, I want to talk a little bit about interior lighting. So with interior lighting, we need to leverage the light tools right over here. So if I click this, I've got point lights, spotlights, strip lights, rectangular lights, and disc lights. And these numbers here are actually the hotkeys on my keyboard. So if I press 2, I'm going to get a spotlight. If I press 1, I'm going to get a point light, and you can see the little icon. If you don't see the icon, you can actually just go over here to display and make sure light source is on. So typically what I like to do in any type of light setup situation, I always place lights where I've actually modeled them, where they appear in the project. So I'm going to go right over here and I'll show you what a spotlight looks like. If I place it here, we can see it's already lighting up the wall, right? And that is because this little cone right here correlates with our cone angle over here. If I increase this, notice how it's lighting it up right over here. I'm going to boost the intensity just so you can see that. And you can choose between candelas or lumens in terms of intensity. You can also go beyond this. So the slider is 300, but I can type in 500. So look at that. So that's how you can dial that in. So if you want it to throw a little bit lower, you can do that. If you want a little higher, That's what that guy is. Then there's this concept of an attenuation radius. That is basically how far the light will affect surfaces. So pay attention to the floor here. If I go all the way down here, it hits the floor. If I go right around here, it just kisses the floor, right? This is overkill. This is just a light little touch. So you've got that all built into it. Then you also have the light source radius as well. This is how intense or sharp the shadows will be. So if you remember from our natural lighting, anything that's like 0 or 1 is going to be much sharper. Anything higher is going to be much softer, right? And what's happening is it's literally making like the source bulb a little bit larger to make it softer, okay? So higher will be softer. Visible and reflection just means in glass, will you see the bulb or not? You can toggle that on and off. And then you have the ability to plug in a color Kelvin value. So if you know, I've bought, 5K lights, you can literally just type in 5,000 and it will move that. Or you can just plug in a color if it's like an LED value, right? This guy, caustics, if you ever see that, that's basically saying, are you going to see those like, if you think of like a pool and it's lit up by light and you see like the ripples and the light and everything, that's caustics. So you can enable that here. It's a little bit more expensive, so it'll harm performance a little bit, but you can turn that on and you'd see that. But let's get back to our light here. So this is manually editing all the properties. You can also load up an IES, which is an actual manufacturer profile of a light. So you can see that. IES 3. It's literally controlling the throw of our light. So you have that as an option, and you can go ahead and customize these values. So let's say 300. I want to raise this a little bit. And once I have a light in a pretty good spot, I'll place it right here. And then I'll actually just start copying them across. How do I do that? I'll hold down Shift and I'll just start dragging over. So Shift, drag over, Shift, and drag over. Shift is the kind of like the copy and the array command. I can actually hold down Control and select all of them. Now I have them all grouped. Hold down Shift, and I've got all of them kind of coming over together. And the best part about all of this is I can actually filter all my lights and Shift select. So I hold down Shift and then click the top or the bottom to select all of them, and I can put them on their own layer. How do I add a layer? I can actually just go over here to Layer, and this drop down, call this guy Lights. I'll double click that, and then I'll go over here and change that to Lights. And now the beauty of layers is I can easily toggle them on and off, and I can tie them to a scene. So if I want a scene with all my lights on, I can do that. If I want them all off, turn off the layer, and I sync this here, and it's totally fine. So that's how you can easily add interior lights using the built-ins here. You do have some other functions as well. You've got the point light. So the point light is basically like an orb light. So I like to place these kind of like in the center of like chandeliers, because I'm not going to add, all these different lights for chandelier. It would take me too long. So I could do something like that, and that's going to kind of emit outwards. These generally, I keep them very, very low. You don't want them to be too intense because they'll look a little crazy. Really what I do for these types of situations where I've got lights on a fixture, I just tweak it with the material. I make sure the material is emissive. And we did this earlier, but this is how I fake lights without having a light object on top of them. It's just faking the appearance, just adding a little bit of lighting. So we've got that. And then we also have strip lights. So strip lights, these are very common in architecture. Think of these as like your LED undercab lighting. Let's just say, I think there was like a desk over here. Let's just pretend like this goes right under it. That's what this looks like. You see that? So it literally looks like a little bar. You can control the size. That's what this guy is here. So I can make it longer. It's like 2000. That would make that longer. I can reduce it. That. So same principles, same lighting parameters. You can make it more intense or less intense. And with any light, you can also control the direction it's facing at. That's what this little ball is. It's a follow me direction. So look at that. Wherever I click and drag and place it, that's what the light will shine at. So that's really useful. I would use them mostly for like, let's say I'm doing gallery lighting and I want to light a painting, right? I could do something like that. So just know that that's out there. Now the next two, rect light and disc light, These guys I kind of use when I'm trying to like fake some lighting or I need to cover a large area. So this is a rectangular light. This is literally a giant plane of light. I usually make these guys kind of big and I'll do something like this. Watch. So I'll say 5,000 and now I'll add a little low intensity and this kind of lights the whole room up in a way. So this is an easy way to just add soft light to your scene. Sometimes I'll place them in front of windows to kind of give it that extra boost of soft light, something like this. So you see how I'm getting soft light right here? That's a little trick that ArchViz artists have been using forever. If you just want it to feel like it's flooding with light. So these are called light cards if you're using it that way. And then lastly, there is the disc light. The disc light is very similar to these like hi-hats right here, where they're just soft, round lights. If you want to use these instead of that, that's totally possible and totally fine. My job here is just to point out the potential, right? So you could do that and it comes out to pretty much the same thing. It's just you're not going to have that long throw that you were getting from the point lights. This is more of a softer diffuse type of light. Okay. So at this point, I definitely recommend that you go around and you start placing these lights, kind of fine tuning them so they don't feel like too bright or too dark. We didn't touch all these here. So go ahead and place those lights just to give you some good experience. And just note, you don't have to do this for every single light. Just for this exercise, it's pretty good to get those reps in. So again, you could just do shift, you can select multiple and go through them. You can also shift and click here and right click and group them. So grouping organizes it nicely. So instead of like 15 objects, it's just one, and you can always expand to click the sub light. So you've got a couple of tricks there. You could also double click and that will select within a group as well. And once you're done with all the lights, it's really important that you just go and make sure they're all on the correct layer. I've got them all on lights, and that's because I've got a check mark next to my lights layer. When I double click a layer, it makes it the default. So anytime I was adding a new light, it was going directly there. Okay. So if you want to follow along, I'm just going to go ahead and fill up my scene here with a remainder of lights. Hold down Control. Boop and boop. And a lot of this, what I'll do is I'll get the lighting into like a good spot. And then once I start doing my rendering, I'll do my final tweaking. It's also really important that you always double check your exposure. So by default, the scene was set to negative 3.5. If I zero this out, it's gonna be much brighter. This is actually what it looks like in my room. And I can tell, wow, it's way too bright in here. So I can actually just go in, select all my spotlights and lower them to about 200 or less. Let's say like 100. That way I'm not getting these burn marks here. But let's say I don't want those burn marks at all, right? I can just cheat and do that. So keep that in mind, right? That's the power of having all this flexibility in our lights, right? I can raise it or I can lower the intensity. So just to show you that again, if I want to completely light up the floor, this looks a little insane. So then I'd compensate by lowering the intensity here to something like this, right? So you've got a couple ways to handle that, but important your exposure is set correctly. Otherwise your lighting is just going to look super off, right? So this looks nice and even. We're not getting any crazy, scalloping on the walls. So I'm happy with this. So in the next video, I want to talk about how we can actually fake interiors if you don't want to model them or add lighting yourself. So in this video, let's talk about parallax interiors. So if you've never heard that term before, basically it's a very easy and cheap way to fake interiors. If I look in this room, right, if any of these rooms, you see how I just see the clouds, but there's nothing behind there. It's just kind of this really sharp glass. If I were to just lower the opacity so I could see through, let's say I do something like this. From afar, this isn't going to look good because I just see my clouds, my horizon line, and I can kind of see in, and there's nothing really special here. Well, parallax interiors, if I go over to assets and then I scroll down to interior parallax, are an easy way to fake depth. So watch this. If I click residential interior and drag it in, check this out. As I move the camera around, it looks like I'm looking through the room at different angles. But here's the best part. It's a simple plane. So it's a very, very easy way to kind of fake an interior, because now I can rotate this guy, 90 degrees, come over here and look at that. It looks like I've got a room, but I actually don't have a room. So when I move it around, it's corresponding to the camera position. And this is all editable. I can play with the lighting, right? The overall lighting. If there's any artificial lights on or off, the intensity of them, the temperature of them, and the positions of this layer. It's kind of moving it forward and backwards, which is really cool. So what I'll do in situations like this, I'll just do a shift copy down, and I'll go ahead and replace this with the different parallax so they're not samey. So go over here to replace from assets. I'm gonna hit confirm, and let me just swap it out with another residential interior. And look at that. So that is such an easy way to just kind of fake what's going on in your scene. I'm just gonna plug that over here. And you can also play with the sizing of everything. So that's what this guy is right over here. I can hit V, and now I can shrink this way and just kind of plug it over here. So look at that. So general good practice, if you don't actually have an interior, use Parallax. If you do have an interior, well, use it, place your lights in there, place your entourage in there so it doesn't feel super plain. So at this point, to get some more practice in, go ahead and start placing some of these Parallax interiors. You can either copy them and replace them like I'm doing here, or you can just go from scratch from the asset library and start placing them. So I can grab them here. So I can go ahead and click any of these guys, drop them in, rotate them, and so on. And you want to tuck them right behind the glass, something like that. And most of our renderings are going to be like somewhere over here, right? So it's important that it's actually facing us. So I'm probably going to put some in here as well. But we want to make sure that we don't really see any emptiness, because that's going to make it look like it's a rendering, right? So let's add a couple more. Let's say, I like these guys because they're kind of like squarish and they work well for this. I can literally just plug in a 45-degree angle like this, something like that. And look at that. Now it looks like I've got a chandelier in here. I can just do shift up, do a replace, and click this guy. Boom. Check that out. And we just push that back a bit. Look at that. Such an easy trick. Yeah, and like, you're not modeling anything extra. It's not slowing down your computer. It's just there, simple to use. So go ahead and apply that to the other side of our space here. And if you find working outside is like a little too bright, you can always go in and lower your exposure. That's why exposure was set to that before, because it was super bright out here. Interior and exterior often have different exposure values. So just pay attention to that, or just swap out your studio setting. We're going to dial in the exact settings we'll need for final renderings, but this, at least you know how to use lighting. So as you're tweaking things, you can move the sun around and you can play with ideas of, should we go with overcast? Should we go with the sun coming this way? Generally speaking, like when I'm working, I'm often always playing with the light. Just want to make sure I'm getting the material in its truest form. So I don't usually do it in overcast. I'll do it with a little bit of light like this. Like this is a good one, exterior day, just so I could see what I'm doing. I can see like the proper reflections and everything. I basically am balancing how much interior versus exterior I'm seeing. So go ahead, finish up the sides, the wings here, the main lobby, just put the artificial lights in there, but these guys will definitely need some sort of parallax. And then the next module, we'll talk all about vegetation, adding trees in, and then adding people and cars in, and then kind of wrapping this up and producing renderings. And we'll dial in the lighting and everything, and we'll talk about camera settings and all that. So I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back. This module is all about vegetation. So when it comes to vegetation, there's a bunch of different ways to actually get the trees and basically any asset into your scene. What I'm talking about is if you were to head over to kind of like these two tabs, path and populate, and if you were to click any of them, you'll see that there's actually a bunch of different ways. And so we'll run through what each of these are, kind of the pros and cons, and like why you would use one over the other. So that's kind of what this module is all about. So just to take it from the start, the simplest, most basic method to bring in any asset is if we head over to our asset library right over here, and we head over to model, nature, you're going to be able to single click any of these and drag them in. So first I'm going to go ahead and find the asset I want. So a certain tree that I really like for this scene is called a cinnamomum. I'm going to totally butcher that, but I'm just going to go ahead and type in cinnamon, just like that. Hit search, and you'll see it's kind of like this leafy tree. But the point is, if I were to click on any of these, I'll just grab this guy, you'll see that it's now on my cursor. It might take a second. And like I mentioned before you even place the tree, you can always rotate it by holding R and spinning it around on your cursor, or holding C and moving your mouse up and down, right? So this is the simplest, this is like a single method in terms of application. So I'm just gonna tuck this guy right over here. Doesn't really matter. We're gonna, fill this up regardless. And I'm gonna hit escape to clear that out. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna delete this guy. Okay, so now we talked about single placement, and now that we've got a large scene, how do we add, large groups, large swaths of trees, right? Because we've got to kind of fill out this whole sidewalk. So the first and easiest method is path. I like path because if you think of it, it's basically connecting point A to point B and then infilling it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click at the very end of the sidewalk and then click this end. And what I'm going to do is now right click. You'll see that there's another node. It's going to start adding plants on this, spline. I don't want to add anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and right click. Doesn't look like anything's happened because my content container, right, is completely empty. So if I go ahead and hit plus here and I start adding some of those, cinnamums, whatever they're called, I'm going to click a couple. And make sure you have a couple in your library here. That way you're going to start getting diversity, because if you use just one, it's going to be samey, right? It's the same exact tree. So it's really important that you're actually mixing it up. So I'm just going to grab any that are not low poly. And I don't want low poly because it's low poly. It's not going to look realistic. Those are good for like distance trees, right? So you can see this one is a little bit too large, right? So what happens when you've got this situation? Obviously, you don't want to have like a crazy scale difference. So what you can do is you can always replace or remove. So you can see here from the picture, there's a little scale guy. Obviously, he's much smaller than this guy. So I can go ahead and hit minus and choose a more appropriate tree. Okay, so just pointing that out, it's very, very easy to go ahead and edit this. Don't feel like, once you click it, like that's it, it's baked in and you can never edit it, because that's like far from the truth, right? We've got some variation here, not a big deal. I'll add another one in and then I'll show you kind of how we can handle that. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit done. And this is what I meant before about it being, non-destructive, you being able to edit the container. You can always hop back in. You can always edit the spline as well. So literally that previous view, right? So I'm just going to X out of that. And now let's talk about what we actually have going on here, right? So we've got our content library, but we also have our density. As I crank this up, it literally adds more items. This is talking about by quantity. So this means there's 20 objects, right? If I were to go here by spacing, I can actually say, hey, like I need these every like 1 meter. So you can see how dense and tight that is, right? I always go by quantity. It's just a little bit easier for me to kind of gauge it that way. Then right below here, we've got our sliders for randomizing and making this feel a little bit more organic. If I increase random rotation, you see how it starts moving all the trees around so they're not the same exact rotation? That's huge for us, right? Same thing with random offset. I'll do a little bit because it's very rare that you would actually have these like in a line perfectly like that. Same thing with spacing. They're not going to be perfectly spaced. You can see that it's moving it instead of like every 3 feet or whatever it is. It's like 3'1", 3'2", and so on. Again, makes it look a little bit more realistic. Then random scaling. This is basically going to play with the randomization and scaling of your trees. So I can actually go ahead and clamp the overall scaling by lowering this guy. So now I'm getting a bunch of different heights. You can see I've got like 2 little baby ones, and this is where that replace function is really useful. So one of the beauties of this container is this tree was looking a little too small, right? I can actually go in there and boost the individual scaling of it. So that way it's more appropriate and matches the other trees. I can always, delete it or add a replacement to it. But my point is like, don't feel like, oh, I made a mistake. Like that's it. So I can actually go ahead and do that. Then I can play with my random scaling some more. and then I can play with the overall scaling. So that's looking pretty good. I might add a little bit more random scaling just so it doesn't feel so samey, but that looks good. And that didn't take much time at all, right? The other thing I'll point out, if you ever see this this guy drop, that just means like if your spline isn't perfectly aligned with the ground, it'll literally drop it on the terrain, which is kind of nice. And then random seed is basically like, give me another spin, give me another generation, you know, roll the dice. I just want to see another version of it. It keeps the same properties, but it's just another procedural generation version, okay? The other thing, if you use this a lot, like let's say you perfected this and you use it on every single job, you can actually just go here to create preset and you can save it to MySpace. And I'm going to call this sidewalk trees, and I'm going to save this to my default folder and hit save. So now what I can do is if I ever click this guy, it's going to tell me right here that this is the path, and I can go ahead by double clicking and create a new path off of that. Watch this. So if I click here and then go here, I'm going to get that same thing. Obviously, there's something I have to change here, right? I have to change the density. So I'm going to go here and lower that. But again, I didn't really do anything, right? I just literally played with the density, and that's it. And if I want, this is an object. So what I mean by that is, if you go here, this is a path. I can actually just copy this. If I hold down Shift and drag this guy out, it's the same thing, right? But because it's the same exact thing, it's going to look identical. That's where random seed kicks in. Bam. There you go. See? I show you guys the tricks here, right? So now let's take a look on the other side. We want to do the same exact thing, and we just want to fill that out. This guy is a full path, so we can copy, but this one's two separate ones. So I'm going to grab this guy and copy him over. Hold down Shift, drag that over. Go ahead, do my little random seed. Now, how did I find the MySpace, you know, my presets? So you go over to Studio, go to MySpace right here, all presets. You should see it right there. You can go ahead and make folders too if you want. You know, I am a little bit lazy. No, honestly, I'll tell you the real reason. It's very good practice to do it because I'm on a actual team. I save most of the work to the team, so my coworkers, my colleagues can benefit from it. Locally, the issue is I move PCs a lot, so it's very rare for me to actually have my settings where I need it to be. So it's better that I just use the team space. But again, I'm just pointing that out. You have that as an option. So I'm going to go in and just lower the density for each. Make sure it makes sense. You know, I'm just going to fly down here. Okay. All right. So that's that. And now I just got to do the same thing for these guys. I can just copy them. They're basically like in the distance. Nobody's really going to see it. So I can just do that. And then I can just copy this guy over. Perfect. And then I'm just going to keep copying these over. So feel free to pause the video and do this on your own. I'm going to be, you know, walking through this as well if you want to follow along. Hold down Shift. Bring that guy in. But you can see, it's like do it once and that's it. And they're so far away that it's like nobody's going to know that it's the same exact seed and everything. So I'm fine with that. These guys I'm going to randomize because they're right across of each other. And I'm just going to copy him over. Make sure they're in the right spot. Perfect. Perfect. But like, I love the simplicity of this. It's pretty soothing, right? And then this guy, I just need to grab a piece, which I think is this guy right here. Control, this multi-select, and copy those guys over. Perfect. So they are in there. That's looking good. I just got this one here, and you can lower the density. Like there's no rules here. I'm just showing you guys, you know, best tips, best practices, kind of how I work. Hold on Control, and we're gonna do 4 right here. Perfect. So now just to clean this up, you'll notice I don't have a layer for vegetation. I'm gonna go ahead and hit vegetation. I like to have layers for like the core components. That's usually like architecture, lights, entourage, cars, or people. Sometimes I merge them. Design options is another one. Context is another one. You'll see that we'll add that up. So how do I get all this stuff in there? I can go here to filter. I'm going to go over to nature, and I'm just going to shift select. So I click the top one, go down to the very, very bottom, hold down shift to select them all, and change them to vegetation. And then I always like to do a little sanity check. That looks gorgeous. Let's save, Control S. There you go. That looks great. So we've got our trees in there, and as I'm like setting up my renderings, if I'm not like happy with this and like I think they're like too large or too small, I just go in here, I play with the random scaling, the overall scaling. I can play with the species. It doesn't matter. We basically built this blueprint for us to work off of. So you've got that, you know, definitely use it to your advantage, right? So I'm just going to keep fine tuning this. Again, all this is customizable. That's my point here. And that's one thing I love about D5. Like you're not, it's very, I mean, like Photoshop back in the day before you had like non-destructive editing, it was like you had to be so careful about doing things because if you did it wrong, like that was it. Here it's, you know, you hop back in, you edit things, it's so easy. So now we want to apply kind of the same principle, but to like our hedges. So the hedges would be these guys up here. Again, this is the path tool, so it's going to give us a little bit more experience. So I'm going to go ahead here, hit path. And now this one's a little bit trickier because we've got curves and we've got a longer surface. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to click here. And now this guy's in a weird spot because he's like in the middle. So I can actually go here to curve, right? And you see that? As I'm dragging it out, it's curving. You see that? I can always go ahead and fix it. I'm going to switch this guy to linear. Again, non-destructive. The curve is nice because that way you don't have to like add like 15 different points. Switch this guy to curve, click there, and click there. And I'm just gonna right click. Now when I click this guy, you see this this term handle length? That's what this is. So we want to tighten that a bit. So it's just a little round, and we can add. Turn this guy to linear. So that'll straighten that off. There you go. Okay. And now watch this. This guy I'm going to lower as well. Okay. Now let's add our hedges. We've got this awesome one. It's called LIG. Yeah, ligustrum. It looks something like this. Yeah, perfect. So it literally looks like a box. Yep, perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and hit done. And I'm going to crank up the density here. So now the problem is I've cranked up the density, but I don't have enough. So this is where by spacing is useful because now I can lower the spacing and look at that. So I don't want any gaps, maybe like a little bit of a gap. Now I do a little bit of random rotation, a little bit of random, little bit of random offset. Yeah, you see how it's looking more natural? Little bit of random spacing, just a little, right guys? Little random spacing. They didn't pay their landscaper, so it's not 100% perfect. But again, the reason we do this in all seriousness is so it looks a little bit more natural than you'd see in the real world. The random rotations are hurting us a little bit on the sides over here. Lower that just a little bit. I'll do like 0.05. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and we just want a little bit of hedges. We just want to look a little bit organic. You can see up against the clouds right there. It doesn't look, you know, samey. Great. So we've got that. And now I want to do the same thing down here. Here, it's a little bit trickier because I've got these breaks where the gate is. So I'm going to have to do one path here, and then I can do paths for these guys. So again, this was the ligustrum. So all I'm going to do is go down to populate, path. And here, if you're feeling lazy or you want to play with a curve, you can do that. You can do curve and then go here. Or by lazy, I mean just like adding a bunch of linear points. It all comes out to the same thing. I'm going to grab that guy, right click, hit done, increase the density. There you go. And then I'm just going to start playing with some of the randomization here, so it looks a little bit more natural. That, perfect. And now I just need straight paths for these guys. You can see like how easy and quick this goes. So I'll go back to populate, go path. I'll do the same thing. I'll just do it right here just so you could see how to do it. Definitely feel free to add the other ones. Perfect. Boost the density. Random scaling. And exactly that. And then you can copy that around. So we've got these guys, and this all came from path. The other way is we can just drop a bunch of assets and then tweak them with groups. So I'll show you an example of that over here. And you could definitely use paths as well, but I'm showing you all the different ways you can work with this. So this great kind of like ivy looking thing called Aglaia. Yeah, here we go. And I like them because they're like kind of bushy, kind of ivy. And what you could do here is drop a bunch, manually, this. And since like the path isn't really big, that's why I'm showing you this way. So I'm just grabbing a bunch of these, right? And now what you could do is literally hold down Control and then group them. So this is another way. Again, you could totally path it. I'm not saying not to, I'm just saying you've got options. So I can go here, I can go group, and then from here, I can literally just hold down Shift and then move them around. The issue with this though, is you'd have to kind of like manually move things around, meaning I'd have to double click into the group and then start shifting these around so they don't look so similar to the ones above, okay? So again, I'm showing you the pros and cons to each of these workflows because it's a real thing. So now that we've got that, I'm going to go ahead and make a path version of that. I always have this habit of going to path here. You could literally do it from here as well. It like kind of drives me nuts that there's like two ways of doing it because I'm so used to like tools just having like one way. So if you see me doing that, that's why it's like a bad muscle memory. So we've got that. And now these guys are about the same height. Now the same process, right? I can increase the density, right? And now I can play with the random scaling, random rotation, a little bit of density. And there we go. That's looking great. And now if I want to add another species, right? There's this great other plant called Alamanda. Yep. If you want a little bit of color, right? So we can inject that. This guy's a little too big. So what do? We click it and we lower the scaling of that guy. So this is great if you want, little pops of color. And like we said before, I can hold down Shift, bring this guy up, and then tweak the seed. And there we go. It's a whole new generation. So go ahead, start filling those guys in. I recommend like just doing a wing and then copying it over. So I'll bring that over, hold down Shift, grab this guy. Okay, that doesn't have anything. And we just play with the seeds here. We could lower the density. Anything to make it look different, right? That's the goal here. Perfect. And then we save. So we talked about paths, right? And we talked about grouping, we talked about placing, and then kind of like our own array. Now I want to talk about brush. Brush and scatters. They're very similar, but also kind of different. So brush, this is basically like, imagine if you were using Photoshop and you want to paint. This is what a brush is for. So if I were to go back and grab my cinnamon, right? I'll just do that. And let me just grab, just one of these guys. You see how there's like a little checkbox? That checkbox just means, is it part of the group, the brush, right? And you can see the settings right here. Radius is literally how big the brush is. Density, I always recommend lowering because by default, I find it very, very high. And if you're not paying attention, it will crash your system because it's so high. Align to terrain is always good if you've got, crazy sculpted terrain. And then size is like literally the scaling. So if I were to left click, you'll see I'm kind of painting, which is fun if you want that kind of control, right? So what's nice is you can keep adding. There is a limitation of 6 plants, right? The other thing you could do if you're dealing with a large swath of area is using scatter. Scatter is incredible. It's a procedural generation tool that lets you add a bunch of different species. You can dictate how close they spawn to each other. You know, if there's a texture map that dictates what should spawn versus not, it's nuts. I love using it, but it is like a very heavy tool in terms of resources and demand on the machine. So if I go to scatter here, I can go ahead and I can left click here, and every time I left click, it's going to go ahead and add that, which is fine, but in my opinion, it's not leveraging the true scatter technology. This is just using kind of like a quick paint bucket tool. You know, going back to Photoshop. If I want the true scatter tool, it's actually under here. So this is what I was saying earlier about like muscle memory. There's like versions of the same tool, but in different areas. So check this out. If I go to scatter here and I go to select material, I can choose to spawn on a material or a model, right? I'm gonna click this guy because this is its own material. I'm gonna go ahead and hit create. And this is going to make a scatter group. So you see this grid, it's basically like figuring out like where to spawn things. So you can go ahead and go to the scatter presets, which is this guy. And you can say, oh, you know, give me that. Or you can go ahead and check your studio, or you can go ahead and manually add the assets. So if we're going to go back to our good friend Cinema and start selecting, you're going to see our UI is going to change a little bit. So let me grab some of these taller guys just so it looks different species wise. And you can see it is adding an insane amount of trees. And it's like, whoa, what is going on here? So check this out. Let's take a look at what's going on. Now we've got a scatter area. So the scatter area is this blue grid. It's basically like the distribution grid. This is basically, if you click it, your individual controller. So now I'm saying make it taller, make it smaller, the probability of what it'll spawn. If I lower this, right? That means it'll spawn less. If I increase this, that means it'll spawn, you know, 3 times as likely as this guy, right? So this is actually pretty cool because now you're getting like infinite variation because you're playing with your distribution curve here, right? So now things get even cooler when you click area, because now you can control the overall density. So if I were to just like lower this to 5, just so there's a little bit, actually, let's go to 1, just so there's a little bit more density. Yep. I can start playing with how they're distributed. So right now I'm saying, hey, this is like your white box, your white texture, like go ahead and just fill that in completely. If I want to add a little bit more noise and realism, I can literally use a noise map. So if I click that, now it's a lot more sparse. If I start to increase this, you see how I'm getting some like pockets? That's literally the noise of the image. So it is telling it, you know, whether to spawn or not based on the color. And that's going to make it look a lot more realistic than just a flat white. So that's very cool because now I can just go into each of these and just fine tune them. If I want to lower the scale or anything, I'm literally the director here. So I've got this, lower the scaling there. I can lower the scaling here. And that looks great. So you want something that looks a little bit like that because in the natural world, you don't have something that looks, you know, super even and straight across, right? You want that to look a little bit natural. So look at that. Look at all that nature. So again, we're getting all this from our scatter. Procedural scatter, we've got our bucket scatter, we've got path, we've got individual placement, we've got grouping, we've got brush. Insane amount of possibilities. So to wrap up, you know, the vegetation series, you know, go ahead and continue filling out any spots, you know, fix any weird things that might be going on. Like here, my offset went a little bit too far. So I'm just going to lower this guy a bit. And I'm just going to do like 1 just to fix that. Okay. So that's your homework for now. And then we'll hop into adding people and that type of entourage. See you in the next video. All right, so let's talk about getting people in here. There's a couple things we need to do before we even start that. First, let's get a little bit organized. So let's go over to our layers and let's just add something for people. You can call this entourage, you can call it people, whatever clicks in your brain as this is the people layer. I'm gonna make sure it's the default layer. That way when I add characters, they're there. by default. Okay, so when it comes to placing people, just like vegetation, you've got a couple modes, right? You've got your typical, one by one mode. So if I were to go over to my assets, model, and find a character, and I place it one by one, I can definitely do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's say I've got Ashley here walking, I place her. It's just, it would take me a really long time to kind of fill up the whole scene. So this is where a path tool comes in. So path tool is the second from the left. When you click it, you'll see that there's a character path. And this is where you can actually add a bunch of people and they can walk along the spline. So the spline is the path. And, kind of add some realism to the scene because it feels crowded. It feels like there's people. So let's go ahead and start that. So I'm going to click character. And all I'm going to do is, we've got all these bushy trees and everything. I'm just kind of going to pop over here and just go right over here. And I'm going to go here, left click kind of at the apex of the curve. And then I'm going to go over here and drag it out all the way to the other side of the street. And before I do anything, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to left click this guy just to make sure it's selected. And I'm going to play with the smoothness. You see that? Just rounding that out. Okay. Now content, we're going to add people. Okay. So this is why I was talking about that. A couple of things for you to pay attention to. Because this is a path, we obviously want people to walk along the path. We should make sure that, two things, they are dynamic, meaning they'll move, and that they are walking. So what I like to do is literally search for walk. That way you're getting a walk cycle person. Idle people, like standing still, is fine, but it's got to make sense. If they're walking along the sidewalk, I'm not going to put someone just standing. The next important thing is to think about the overall setting, the environment, and what's appropriate for your rendering. There's a whole science behind this, but long story short, if it's a sunny day, right? We want to make sure that people make sense. It's not raining, so I wouldn't choose Mr. Umbrella Man. We don't have a pool here, so I wouldn't choose Layla here, and I'm not in the inside of a restaurant, so I probably wouldn't take John here. So there's kind of an art of finding the correct asset. That's my point here. So, we want to find someone. It's a nice sunny day. How's Edward looking? He's looking good. We'll go with him. Patricia, just going to keep adding, and you can see my content library is filling up. Marie, I'm just going to add a bunch of people. And we don't want to have just 2 people in here. We want to have a bunch because they're going to start repeating. All right. So let's just say we'll add Grace because if it's a nice day. I'll also say if you are working on, let's say your company or wherever you're working, global, international, and you're working, in a specific country or region, if you're working on a project in Asia, make sure it looks like people from Asia, right? Keep that in mind. I feel like that's such an easy giveaway when you're doing, these renderings or CGI in general, and there's a mix match between, ethnicity or the clothing of people. Okay, so just pay attention to that. And that's true, for US, Middle East. Make it make sense. Make it make sense with the climate. Okay. I know I'm harping on this, but I can't tell you how many times this comes up where a rendering just gets kind of destroyed because of something like that. And it's a serious thing. Clients can easily get derailed by that. So Raymond, for example, he's right on the threshold of me wanting to use him, but not wanting to use him because he's in a hoodie. So I'm thinking about the weather. I'm probably not going to be doing a cold looking, type of rendering. But Charles, he's in shorts and a sweater. So something like that. Anyways, we've got a bunch of characters here. I'm going to hit done. And now let's talk about what's going on here. So what we could do here is by default, we can do a dual track, meaning you have people going down one way and the other. You can kind of see that there, but you have to be a little bit careful because your minimum width needs to be tight enough where people aren't clipping, right? So depending on what you're doing, you might want to just deal with one and then fill in the gap or edit the path. So you could do dual, right? So right now they're clipping, that's no good. So I just want to move that over. So this is where it gets a little tricky. So I'm just going to keep lowering that width so nobody's bumping into that. Then you've got reverse the direction if you want people to go this way or that way. And then density, how many people, right? And the spacing between them. Random spacing is always good. And then you can override the speed. Obviously, I don't want anyone racing by at like 300 miles per hour. So default speed is totally fine. And drop is good if your spline didn't snap to the geometry and you want it to actually lay on top of it. So I'm probably going to boost the density a bit. Okay, and let's include more random spacing. And just to make it feel more populated, I'm probably going to go with dual and just mess with my track a bit. So I'm going to lower the minimum width. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of move everything a little bit out and over. There you go. And then I can get rid of this one person as needed. But anyways, that's my point here. The nice thing, if you didn't realize about like D5 paths in general, is when you click on a path, it's non-destructive, meaning you can go in there and you can edit it further. It's not like you're stuck and like that's it. So just pay attention to that. If your density is too high, you know, you're gonna run into situations where people are on top of each other. You can lower that. Dual does a good job of adding a lot of people, but you might want to populate this so you're not getting two of the same characters, right? So I'd probably just add a couple more just so there's, you know, enough variety. Let's see, let's add like 2 more people to Lisa, and let's add Joseph. Okay, great. And that's gonna help as well. Perfect. So we got people up there. We can also add people like in these little window alcoves. So this is where I'd probably use like the singular assets. So let's find someone preferably unique, and they don't need to be walking. They could just be hanging out. So if they're hanging out, let's go with something casual, maybe not that casual, right? Let's see. All right, she's on the phone. This looks like a good place to take a phone call. I could put her here. Let's see. Put this guy over here and so on. So we're just, you know, dropping them into the balconies. You know, you could go one step further and start making little stories or vignettes. You know, I can have this guy, Casual Man 219, talking to Casual Woman 269, you know, like little stories there. And that's super important in image making. So now it looks like they're just talking and they're not just like static pieces. But, you know, I say static pieces, but they literally are static because they're not the dynamic asset. And I know that because it doesn't have anything here and they're not moving. So pay attention to that when you're doing animations, right? So we've got people like that, you know, feel free to go nuts, add more people. I don't care. I'm just showing you how to do this, right? So then up here, you know, where it's a little bit empty, this is actually where we could start adding, you know, furniture if we want to do like chairs or anything, or tables, and then adding people there as well. So if we wanted to do something like that, we could go over to outdoor furniture, and now we can start looking for some tables. We could also do like loungers, but you know, we could do something like this. And we've got table and chair sets, so I'm just going to download a bunch of these. And this is an easy way to just populate all this so it doesn't seem so empty. Because ideally, like from an aerial shot or somewhere high up, you kind of see all this and it doesn't look super empty. So let's see how big this is. Good. Definitely a good size. And I'm just going to rotate this so it's not blocking the way, and I'm going to anchor it like right there. Okay. I'll do the same thing over here. A little nice tip that you might not know, but you see how there's this bounding box over the assets? That is a tell that this is a grouped asset. Why is a grouped asset important? Well, if you double click an object, you're now in the group. So I could move this by itself, right? Or I could just click this and I see everything exposed there. This is great because there's some assets where it's like, you drop it in and like, that's it, you can't edit it. But here you can actually edit every component of that. So that's really nice. So let's go ahead and let's add a couple more. And you know, you don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing. I'm just here as your guide. You can, you know, choose the same pieces or do your own. Doesn't matter to me. We're just here to make nice images and learn D5. Okay, so we got some nice chairs here, and we gotta fix that parallax. That's what that's sticking out there. Yeah, I can do a bunch of dining tables. So watch this. I can click this, hold down Shift, drag out in an arrow or an axis, and now you got a bunch of these. I'll do one over here, and we'll do one here. And now what I'm gonna do is select all of these. Okay, and right over here, check this guy out. You got random rotation. Bam, look at that. So the other fellas, you've got random size. I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to have different chair sizes. And then you've got random rotation, and then you've got random location. But this, I wanted to go linear, so it wouldn't make too much sense, right? So I've got all that. Let me add a couple more right down here. And you might just do one. Totally fine. And then this is where we can go and add more people. And these people, they can, you know, back to the storytelling thing, they could either be getting their order taken, right? We've got maybe a little restaurant up here. Look at that. We've got someone sitting here. Let's see how she actually looks, because she looks like she belongs like at a reception. No, we'll make it work. Yeah, I'll just drag her in like that. And now, again, we're making these little stories. So we probably want something casual. This is actually kind of nice. You know how I was saying before about, you know, like the locale of your project, you know, regional, there's a whole category for that. And this is actually great. You know, just talking from my own experience, like when it comes to a project in the Middle East, like even the clothing, like the type of clothing and even the headdress, extremely important that you get it correct for that specific region. So really nice that this is all, you know, laid out there. So kudos to D5 for doing that. But anywho, you've got categories here. Let's see what else we've got in professionals. Professionals might be like, just like people working. Yeah. I think casual or business is probably our best bet. And we want them sitting, but sitting is not something that's going to come up. Like walking comes up, but some people have sitting in their name. Like I'll show you. So you see that, like we don't have that many people, but we'll get by. We'll add Claudia in and so on. So, you know, this could be your homework if you like doing this, adding it in, making the stories, you know, adding more waiters and so on. So that way, if you're doing like an aerial view, you've got all that. Okay. So this was adding people. In the next video, I want to talk about adding cars. All right, so let's talk about adding cars to our project. So we're gonna head right over to our path friend that we found over here before, and we're gonna go over to vehicle. And what's nice about this is nothing different from the actual tool we used before for the people, but now we're just using it for cars. So because I already have road markings on the street for cars, I can actually use that as the center line because I'm gonna wind up using a dual path. So cars can go both ways, okay? So I'm just gonna go here and I'm gonna click. Well, I guess you've got two ways, right? You could just go up and down, right? Or if you wanna turn the bend, totally fine with that if you want practice doing that. So I'm just gonna go this way. We'll go all the way over here. And I'm gonna right click. And then what I like to do, you could define it as a curve earlier on. Personally, I feel like it adds too much of a bias as opposed to going to linear and then smoothing it out. You see what I mean? You see how this is like a reasonable elbow, but curve is like a little too curvy. Curve is better when you don't have an anchor point here. This is just like my habit. So you see what works best. But I'm happy with that. I'm gonna hit done, and then we can start adding some cars. We go over to content, and we got to make sure we clear out our filter and we go over to vehicle. So I'm going to grab some of these guys. We'll grab this. Grab these guys. And again, we want variety, so I'm just going to add a bunch of cars. And again, pay attention to kind of like the vibe you're looking for. If this is like a high-end locale, you know, get your Mercedes in there, your Porsches in there, you know, make it make sense. You know, I'm not gonna put in this like, you know, this looks like a old Chevy, right? It's like a old Toyota, right? We want it to fit in here. So we've got all that. I'm gonna turn on my dual over here. Okay, and then depending on where you are in the world, you might want to reverse the direction. But anyways, you've got your density and you've got your speed. Little pro tip about the speed. If this is driving you nuts, the constant driving, you could always set it to 0 and they're stopped there. And what's kind of nice about this is this kind of lets you choose almost like the seed of the cars, of like, if you want the car to be further or not. Like if you increase the speed a little bit, have it clear a tree or something, and then you can pause it without having to kill the dynamics of the viewport over here. If you don't know what I'm talking about, right over here, there's the dynamic mode. Pay attention to my people. You see how they froze? So now when I click that, they move. Well, you know, why is this a big deal? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the world of ArchViz and architecture, you're always iterating on an image, whether it's like a variation or markups or something. And cars, depending on when you take the rendering, the car may have moved. So if you're doing all these adjustments to a car in the way and it keeps moving, well, you're gonna have issues with your composition and collaging in Photoshop. So just putting that out there, just a little hack there. Other little hack, depending on where you are in the world, you might want to toggle on left-hand drive, and depending on the time of day, if you want the lights to be on or off. Okay, so just putting that all out there, but this is essentially how you build the spline out so you can have the cars go there. So again, you've got a couple different ways. You could arc it this way, curve it that way, or just run it straight like a grid. Doesn't matter. I'm just here to show you how this stuff works. And you can always play with the density a bit if you want to see a little bit more or less. But I think just for this right now, I'm just gonna let the cars go a little bit. And just once I'm in a good spot, I'll probably freeze it. And then if I want total control over every single car, I'd probably do an individual placement where I go to assets and then I drop a car in. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you ever find an asset, you know, doesn't really fit what you're going for, you can always go here and change the ratio, basically like how frequently it spawns or not, or just remove it altogether. So you've got that as an option as well. So let's say I really don't like this guy, I can just subtract that and that's gone. So you've got a couple options there. So anyways, so now that we've got our people and our cars in here, you know, we can start thinking about some extra details we can add to the scene. And just before I say anything, if any of these icons are driving you nuts, like the spline and the lights or anything, just remember under display, you can always turn these off if you find them distracting. So check that out. Makes it a little bit easier to kind of understand the image, because it can be a little distracting. So, you know, what am I talking about with extra details, right, to fill up the scenes? Well, right now our street is looking pretty clean, so we can use these things called decals, which are kind of like fancy stickers to make it look a little bit realistic. We would probably even put up some signs. You know, signs would make it feel realistic. You know, when you're doing a rendering, you have to think of, you know, what happens in the real world that looks realistic that I should carry over into my 3D. We can also add grass, you know, via scatter and everything. We didn't do that earlier because it's quite heavy in terms of like rendering and everything. So that can be an optional thing. But let's start tackling all these little details in the next video. All right, so in this video, let's talk about adding extra signage and decals and all that just to make it feel a little bit more realistic. So I'm gonna head over to assets. What I can search for over here is traffic. And what this is gonna do is bring up traffic lights. So you've got a bunch of different signs or choices of what you wanna do here, but I want it to feel, you know, realistic of what you would kind of expect in this area. So I'm gonna go with this one, but you can go with anyone, like, you know, this crosswalk one is fine, especially for like around the crosswalk. You know, just make sure the signage is a good example. The signage makes sense. You know, here we set it up as a two-way, but if you have it set up as a one-way, this is a good example. But this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's got to make sense. You know, like I was saying with the people, like it's got to make sense in terms of time of day or climate or whatever, right? Or region. Same thing with our entourage here. So if I've got an awesome sign here, I just got to make sure it makes sense with my traffic. So I can have it kind of do something like that, and that's going to help fill in some of the details there. So that looks great. I can even go with one of these guys. Again, I'm just having fun with it. You are totally free to do whatever you like, but the idea is we want to add these types of details, right? The other type of detail, like I was saying before, decals. So decals are just kind of like fancy stickers. So you can keep adding more if you want. You know, you've got signage, you've got traffic lights, cones, but decals, check this guy. These guys are stickers. So if I were to click any of them, right, and put them over here, they kind of stick to the actual model. So based on, you know, the geometry of the scene, you see that? It's gonna kind of move, right? So now that I've got that here, I'm gonna hold down R and rotate, and I can just do something like that. I left click, and it looks like it's literally painted on. So this is a really nice, cheap way to add some extra details without you having to do, you know, UV mapping or anything. So what I like to do is lower the opacity a little bit, just so it looks a little worn and it's not like fresh, brand new stripes. So I like that. I'm gonna wear that down. I'll go here, I'll rotate it. So I'll do stuff for like signage like that. I'll also go ahead and just look at the category itself. So again, this is under model, okay? I always forget this, but it's under model. It's not under material. You kind of feel like it's material, but it's not. So I'll go ahead and I'll start grabbing some of these decals. Manhole cover is a great one. You know, I'll put one right here. You know, if you want to start like ripping up the building a little bit and making that look a little bit worn, that's what these guys are for. Like the brick, like this wouldn't make sense on our project, but this is a really good way to just make it look like it's been damaged. So watch this. You see that? Like it's exposing the layer under it. Like that's pretty cool. But for us, you know, these asphalt marks, like this is a good way to give you some variation. Like look at that. Like that's gonna help it make it look a little bit dirtier. You can scale it up as well. But again, it's like a little too intense. So I always lower the opacity just to blend it in. So look at that. That looks great. I can go ahead and just kind of copy this around. And this is just giving me some very light variation. And how this works is anything that's within the bounding box, it's going to stick to. So I'll give you a good example. Let me crank up the opacity here so you can see it. You see how it's on the sidewalk? That's what I mean. If I hit V and I start playing, I'm going to just untoggle that. And I start playing with the Z, it's going to be removing itself. You see that? So it's based on the bounding box, okay? So if you don't want it to affect something, just pull it off, okay? So that's why I use that guy. I'm gonna lower opacity a bit. Yeah, there we go. That's great. And then you can go ahead and add these. I like these pedestrian crossing signs. I'm gonna hold down C just to scale it. And I'm just gonna make it fit right in here because this is a really nice way to add detail. I hit V to switch and then just shift and I'll copy over. So if you want to add a crosswalk with like cars and people, be my guest. That's how you do that. So that's one way of doing it. I'm gonna repeat the same over here. Hold down shift and I'm going to hit V and just resort these guys. Boop. But you can see it adds a lot of realism with not a lot of work. But you do need to be a little careful with it. I like to put a little bit on the building just because, you know, even a brand new building is going to have some sort of weathering to it. You know, it rains, right? Like it's not going to be 100% perfect. So that's like a really good way of adding that. Like, for example, you could grab something like this and go over here. And again, you got to be really careful and delicate with this. So let me just flip it upside down. So I'm not going to place it like this, but my point is this is too extreme, right? But like this, that's not that bad. That's kind of real in terms of what would happen. You know, grime would, you know, collect under there and so on. So it's not a bad idea to just add a little bit of this, especially on like really large walls. What I like to do is like scale it up really, really big and then just completely kill the opacity, just so I get a little bit of variation. You see that? Just a little bit of variation, okay? It's very subtle, okay? I'm gonna keep using the word subtle because that's literally what this is all about, being extremely subtle. Because if you go too extreme, it's gonna look bad, and your client's gonna be like, you know, why is my brand new building falling apart, right? So, so just pay attention to that. Another thing you could do is add leaves. Leaves are a really nice way to just like add some extra detail, where you can like tuck them in right here, especially because like we know they collect, you know, around the edges of sidewalks and everything. So like you could do that, right? That's a nice little detail. That's sweet. If you like this kind of stuff, like putting the leaves in the crevices, I'll give you a little extra bonus tip here. And again, you can go ahead, keep placing more traffic lights, keep placing more decals, more people, whatever. But if you want to add more leaves in the corners, just add that little level of realism. What you could do is head over to scatter, and let me just hit save. I always get paranoid of scattering, and I'm gonna go ahead and select this material and watch what I'm gonna be able to do. You see, there's two ways of doing this. You see how I have this broken out as a different material and then it hits the curb? So what I can do is I can either scatter along this whole material, or I can just scatter along the edges of this material. I'll show it here on the bigger one just so it's a little bit more visible, and then you can be the judge of that. So you see how I've got grids everywhere? Well, I don't want leaves everywhere, right? I want them in just the edges. So how do I do that? If you head over to this guy where it says edge divide, look at that. You see how I've got like two different colors now? I've got sub areas. Okay. So if I were to click sub area 1, you know, the bright cyan means active, and then go here to content and then go add assets. Watch this. If I find some leaves, I'm just gonna search leaves, and you can find like little pebbles, whatever. The point is I want to show you this trick. Let's say I go with, I want to find, you could probably go with these like little leaves, but I'll go with this just so you can see this. Watch this. Look at that. It's just adding this. Let me just turn this off, in the edges, but it's just the edges of the asphalt, right? So because I have this little strip right close to the sidewalk, you might want to select that area. The point is, I want to show you that edge scatter is pretty cool and pretty amazing. So if you want to add, you know, even like rocks, maybe rocks would make sense here. Like, you know, not like boulders, but like little pebbles. Like, watch this, like if I do pebbles, because cars are always kicking things up. You know, just something little like that. And then I could delete this guy. Look at that. I like little details like that. Like that's fine. And then you could just lower the density of this. So I can go to scaling, and then over to sub area, I can lower the density to be like 25. It's a very, very subtle thing. So to add the leaves here, just to go back to that, let's go to select material, click this guy, create, and here it's like already small enough where you probably don't need to do the edge divide, but I want to show you that cool feature anyways. So let's just add the assets here, and let's add some leaves. Okay, and then you can grab like individual guys like this. Okay, we got that. And you can see it's spawning that in, but the density is kind of low, so I can go ahead and increase this if I want. Okay, increase our clusters a bit. And I can even increase the scale of them if I find them to be a little bit too low. So you've got that, okay? So pretty sick. I'm gonna do 300. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, look at that. Just a nice little detail. Okay, awesome. So we got all that. That's looking great. Yeah, look at that. That's such a nice touch. So simple. I mean, you can even like just do a single, just like grab this and then make it really large, but this is a little too concentrated. And if you're paying attention to what I was saying earlier, these are like autumnal leaves, and all these are kind of like spring-ish like. So you don't want that weird color contrast where it's like the leaves should be on the trees because it's springtime. You know, there shouldn't be, you know, autumn leaves on the ground, right? It makes sense that there's, you know, a couple occasional green leaves, you know, that happens. That's not unheard of, right? So anyways, go ahead, place leaves, place these details, make it feel like a lived-in scene. And in the next set of videos, we will be working on renderings so you can get our awesome project out into stills. See you in the next one. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about how we're going to export out our first rendering. So before we do that, it's always good to organize ourselves a little bit. We went a little bit crazy and started adding decals without changing our layers. So I'll show you how to easily fix that. So let's go over to add layers. Let's go to decals. And all I'm going to do here is search my filter for decal. Click this guy. And I'm just going to click the top one, hold down shift, click the bottom one, and just go right over here and change it. And look at that, they're now all on decals. So that cleans it up. You could do the same thing for your scatter groups. So I can grab all my scatter here, select all these. Actually, just kidding, you have to do them one at a time. So just make sure they're on vegetation, boom. Perfect. So now that that's all cleaned up, I'm gonna save, and now we're going to add a rendering. So ironically, I am in a really good spot in terms of like position and layout of where I'd want to take a shot. You know, think of this as the hero shot. And what I like about this is I've got these really nice trees, just kind of like framing the image nicely. They're giving me a nice foreground, which I can blur with some depth of field. And I've got a nice midground here. And I've got the sky as the background. Ideally, I get some like city context to be the background, and that's totally possible. I can add that in, but just, you know, let's set up an initial scene before we do all that, just so we can see what we have to model or import or add before actually hitting render. So I'm gonna hit add scene, and, you know, don't worry about the final layout. Let's just call this, you know, working hero. And what I want to do is click this guy, edit camera. So many people don't know that this is actually a button. This is where the settings live of the camera, okay? It's not just like a pretty little, hey, this is a scene thing. No, this is where we do the work, okay? And if you like to be organized, you can go ahead and actually create a scene group. So you can call this, you know, final images if you want, and you can drag images right in, okay? There's a little trick with adding them into the folder or the group. You know, if you pay attention to the white line, this, you see how I'm hanging out to the right, would fit in the folder. This would not, okay? This would not, but this would. And you're like, Andy, what the heck are you talking about? It's such a thin, very like subtle line. Just pay attention to the left part of the line. You see here it's full width, but here it shrinks a little bit. It's like so subtle, and it like kind of drives me nuts a little bit, because if you're not paying attention, you kind of like drop it off into the wrong spot. So anyways, we've got that there. You know, what should we be thinking about when we're doing these types of camera angles? One, the biggest thing is camera height. You know, are you going to be up in the air, or are you going to be eye level? Traditionally speaking, as humans, we're used to being at eye level, right? We're used to like standing at a sidewalk and looking over at a building, right? That's very natural to us. So what I want to do is just make sure that I'm not that high. I want to make sure that I'm kind of mimicking that. So this feels about right. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit update scene. And I'm sure you're wondering, well, how do I make sure I'm like perfectly at eye level? So there's a couple little tricks. You could go over here to navigation and click walk, and this is going to put you in walk mode where you're literally walking. That's one way of doing it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Or you could just place an asset, like place a person, and make sure you match that kind of eye level. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, if I head over to character, and let's say we got Jaden over here, kind of want to fly over here, and you can see I'm at eye level. So that's one way of doing it. And generally speaking, it's good to always look up at the architecture. It makes it feel a little bit more proud, a little bit more heroic. So that's why I'm kind of pointed this way. I also want to be conscious of what is going on in the bottom third of my image. There's like a lot of asphalt here. So that's a little boring. So I might just push a little bit forward, something like that, and then look a little bit towards the sky. So I'm going to save that. And now I'm going to start playing with some of my settings here. I'm going to leave my exposure for now. I'm going to work on my projection mode. I'm going to switch this to 2-point perspective. And this is going to make all my verticals go perfectly straight. So let me just expand this view. And just to show you what that means, if I were to go over here, you see how it's distorting and it looks perfectly straight. If I turn that off, you see how it kind of bows in. Typically speaking, when we're taking photos of architecture, you always want 2-point perspective on. So I really like this shot. It's making our building look heroic. I'm gonna save that. But how else can we improve the look of it? You know, we have our aspect ratio. 16:9 is our typical landscape cut. This looks good, but I'm definitely gonna need a lot of context to fill that in, which isn't a bad thing. We're kind of planning, you know, what we need for the shot. If I want to elongate my building or make it feel a little bit taller, I do have the option of doing, you know, an inverse of that, where I'm going this way, which could be fun. I could also go with something like this, something a little bit more square-like, and play with the focal length, which is kind of like the zoom of the image. And what's nice about this is I've kind of, you know, if you think about breaking up the image into thirds, I've got 1/3 sky, 1/3 architecture, and 1/3 kind of ground and everything. And I actually don't mind this at all. And just like as an artist, I've been trying to like force myself out of the typical 16:9 normal average kind of cut of an image, just because we're so used to seeing it. It's kind of fun seeing these different aspect ratios. So feel free to experiment with this. If you need 16:9 or 9:16, that's totally fine. But sometimes it's fun to experiment. What I like to do is I'll save a scene, and then as I have that saved, I'll just go and hit add scene and start working on that, and then just generate an option. Like, think of it this way. It's kind of free in a way in terms of like taking the photograph. So there's nothing wrong with having a 16:9 and, you know, a 3:4, right? So I could just call this 16:9, and, you know, colons don't work there. So it's just gonna be 169, but you've got that. That's my point. So you got options. So I'm just gonna go here, and right over here, this is basically the pixel size. So if you've got to be very precise, you know, let's say you've got requirements from a graphic designer of what it should be, you can plug those in. Focal length, like I was saying earlier, you can essentially like zoom in to your project. Just know the higher the value, the flatter the image will look. The lower the value, the more kind of like wide fisheye look you'll have. Because of this angle and aspect ratio, 45 feels pretty good. But if I were to go to my 16:9, I'd probably go with something a little bit different. So 27 feels appropriate here. So there's a correlation between your aspect ratio and your focal length. So just pay attention to that. It's not like you can always say 45, 45, 45 or 27, 27. There is, you know, some pros and cons to that. So we've got that. The next one is camera clipping plane. Let's say I didn't want these trees or something's in my face. Maybe it's glass or a door. I can actually just clip. So it's almost like a movable section plane. Okay. Then we've got my favorite guy, depth of field. This is what's going to blur your foreground and your background. So I've turned it on. There's no focus right now. So I'm going to hit set focus, and I'm just going to click at the front of my building. I'm going to hit right click, and you see how it's automatically blurred this out. So let me toggle that on and off. Okay, let me turn my focus back on. There you go. So in general, I think 10 is a little bit extreme. You'll find me around 7. That'll give it a nice blur. I really like that, and I'm going to save that there. So play around with the aspect ratio and the focal length and everything. And then in the next video, we'll tweak some of our post-production settings, and then we'll hit export. All right, so now let's talk about tweaking our settings, okay? So one of the biggest settings for a camera is the exposure setting. And this is kind of, think of it as the brightness of the image. I generally like to start at 0 and play with my settings from there. Here you can see this is very, very bright and sunny. Obviously it's a little bit too sunny. So the easiest way is to just, lower down the exposure, but you could also just edit the settings of your sky. So I'm just gonna make a new scene just to kind of show you the process of kind of like resetting your settings, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna go over to environment, and you can see, okay, sunlight intensity is at 20, like no wonder that was happening, right? So I'm gonna lower this down to about like 3. 3 is typically like a little bit extreme for what I usually go with, but that's because of the HDRI that's here. This will always change depending on the HDRI you have, because you're getting different sun intensity. If I were to just switch to, let's just say default, and I did midday 2, okay, and then let me rotate this guy around. This just looks weird, right? Because the light settings are completely incorrect for midday 2. Same thing with the intensity, right? So that's what I was saying. It's going to depend on what HDRI you've used, right? If you use the AI enhancer or if you use D5 Studio, just pay attention to that. It's really difficult to reuse the same exact settings on every single one. So here's another example. If I were to go to clear sunny day, things are going to look a little out of whack with my light settings here, right? So that's why it's important to just realize, like, it's going to matter. And then if you go to Geo and Sky, right, you're going to have a whole nother set of settings here as well. If I were to go over to cloud settings and choose this guy, then I have the option of expanding and tweaking my intensity over here and so on. So it really depends on the type of scene you're going for. In terms of like, what is my favorite lighting system? I typically go to HDRI just because I find it to be the most realistic, because it uses a high quality image to generate all this shading and lighting. So depending on what you want to do, whether it's sunset or early morning or cloudy, you've got an HDRI here. There's plenty of sites online that give you options as well. And if this isn't enough for you, you can always go to D5 Studio and grab any of these guys, and they will basically do the same thing. So let's say I wanted exterior day. It's going to add in the HDRI that was used here. Look at that. That's here. So that looks great. It's using this here. And this is all editable. Look at that. Like, this is really nice lighting. Like, I can do something like that. And this is really, really dialed in. I think the wind is a little strong. Just gonna kill that a little bit. But this looks great. From here, I can play with the lighting if I think this is too bright or not. And there's a nice correlation between your glass and the sky, right? So I might lower this just a tad. And then the skylight is basically the light being bounced around. So it's literally the light of the sky. So very, very important that you're kind of conscious of what you're using. But I find using Studio and the AI atmosphere match to be kind of like the easiest way to just have a nice starting point without having to tweak or like dig for all this, because we're just driving it with a couple settings and we've got phenomenal results. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Just to kind of break down a little bit more of like what I typically change. The sun disk radius is very, very important. I typically keep this softer than harsher just because I want soft lighting. Harsh lighting is not flattering by any means, right? And then caustics. Caustics is basically if you've got any, water reflections going on and you want to see those kind of like squiggles in it. That's what caustics is for. So I can turn that off. It does have a little bit of an expense in terms of computation, but you've got that there. And then color temperature, how warm or cold the image is. So these are dialed in. So that's why I'm a big fan of using D5 Studio, okay? So we've got that there. I'm gonna save that. If none of this satisfies you for some reason, you can always go to AI Atmosphere Match and use either one of the default templates, or find an image that you like and it'll go ahead and add those light settings for you. Like, just to show you, let me just save this. And I know I've talked about this before, but I don't know, I love this stuff. So it's good to kind of show you. really, send it home. So we'll generate that just so you can see. It's going to take an image, and you can grab an image from Instagram, Pinterest, whatever, and it's going to start taking those settings and applying it. And there is a nice pro meaning like benefit of using the AI atmosphere match, and I'll explain that in just a second once we get into post-processing. But it gave me that nice cloudy look and feel, which is totally cool. Made a little grim here. I'm just going to boost that. If you go over to effect, this is what you get, that lookup table, that LUT. This is one benefit. LUTs, they're kind of like, think of them as like, the old school Instagram filters. Like if you want something like really punchy, that's what those guys are. There's a couple presets that come in with D5 already that you can use. Like this one's really nice, and you can tune the intensity if you want a little bit more contrast or not. So AI will generate one by default. But anyways, I'm just pointing that out because this is all super important when it comes to making your image. So I like all that. Let's look at our effect. So again, I've got that lookup table. I can lower it if I find it to be a little bit too much. Exposure, let me just take a look at my lighting settings. I can keep it somewhere around there. I think that's a pretty good spot. Shadows, this one's kind of important. You don't want to go like too dark or too light. If you ever go too far, you can always right click and reset it. I'm just going to lift this a bit. Okay. And then you've got, your bloom settings. If you want a little bit of a glow, which isn't the worst thing, but what I like to always look out for is, am I burning the image anywhere? Like, is something getting so bright that I can't even make out the material? And that's kind of where these highlight local exposure guys kick in. So this is going to help lower it a bit, but overall, you want to just lower it with exposure and your sun. It shouldn't feel completely washed out. So that's going to help a lot. The other big thing I always add is vignette, just so it darkens the edges. That's what this guy is right there. And a little bit of chromatic aberration. Check that out. That's basically the misalignment between the colors of a lens. A really high-end camera is going to do its best to remove that, but there's always a little bit of that fringing. And then we've got our saturation. This is, your punch of color. So this is 0, and then this was 0.06. So again, depending on the style and the vibe, you might go desaturated, you might go oversaturated. I will say in the world of CGI, we tend to oversaturate. So it's good to kind of desaturate to make it feel more realistic. Like this is more realistic than this, but if I'm trying to sell something, I'm probably gonna go that way. Like I want it to look, lifelike, but if I'm going for realism, I go this way. So again, keep that in mind. The next big thing that I always add is AO, ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion, these are all your little contact shadows. And what I like to do is kind of dial in the radius, like how much extra shadow I want. And then I put this on and it basically adds that in. It's going to add some extra darkness into our project. So that's great. That makes it look much more grounded, especially in the corners and everything. And that looks great. So I'm happy with this. I'm going to save this. Okay. And now I can go back to inspector. Again, this is where all of our camera settings were. Just going to make sure 16:9 is there. Going to make sure depth of field is back on. Kind of doing a final pass before everything. Going to right click. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit photo mode. So that's this guy right over here. Image. I'm going to click that. And now I have the ability to type in an override for an aspect ratio. I'm going to go with the original because we did the work already. I'm going to go with a 2K size. So this is going to bump up. If I do, 4K, it's going to be, kind of like 4 times that, right? So this is what I mean by the preset. So you can see right down here, this is 2560 by 1440 as opposed to 1920 by 1080. So this is like your last chance to add a little bit more resolution. Then you have the ability to show a watermark and add channels. Like if you want to do a sky mask or ambient occlusion or material ID, those are definitely a possibility. But generally speaking, you don't really need them unless you plan on going into Photoshop, right? So before I hit render, I do want to revisit the project briefly and just add some context, because that's why we went down this whole exercise, just to see, you know, what's missing. And so I need some buildings here. So I can do that really quick. So I'm just going to go to update scene, hit exit, and exit's going to knock you out of this photo mode and bring you, just get rid of that, bring you back into editor mode. So what I like to do is go to outdoor. And if you have actual context, you could like bring it in via Cesium, which is an incredible plugin for bringing in real world data. We use that all the time. But outdoor, you can just grab some of these like dummy buildings. And this is a great way to just fill in those details. So I can grab this guy. And my goal here is just to kind of hide the horizon line. I don't want to see the blue sky, right? So I've got this, and I don't want it to also overtake my building, so I might scale it down a bit. Again, we're making this up, so it's okay to do this kind of stuff. So I've got this here, bring this over here. Accidentally added a light, and I'm just going to scale this. Perfect. And now that has gotten rid of that. We're going to see a little bit of sky there. So what I can do is add, we want to find something a little bit horizontal. Yeah, we can add these guys in. And the context buildings in general are also really good, not only just for the for blocking the horizon, but also for your reflections. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment once this loads. So right now our glass, for the most part, is just reflecting the sky, right? Because that makes sense. But if you have a building opposite of the glass, it's going to be reflecting that, right? I'm going to bring this guy down and scale him. And he's going to be out in the distance, so I'm not too worried about his size. We'll make him a little bit more. Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So right now it's like the trees and everything. I can go ahead and add, you know, a building over here just to kind of take care of all those reflections that I was talking about, and also cast some reflections on the site itself. I might just rotate this and just make sure it's not floating in the sky. Okay, so that's going to help ground all this. And this is where that clipping plane is useful, because if the building's in the way, it'll clip. So now that we've got all that, let's head over to our scene. I believe this was the guy we're working on. And I've got just a little bit of a sliver here. There we go. And go hide that. That's all hidden. This is perfect. It's looking good. Just double check. This one I believe is the AI atmosphere match one. Yeah, perfect. So now I can go to image. We've got our 2K. We could do the channels if we want. And I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And if you're wondering what this guy is color grading, because I get this a couple times, this is actually an extra widget that's hidden by default. If you go under preference, widget, and then color grading, you can turn that on. And this is how you would actually override the color of your shadows and your sun and everything. This one's a lot of fun. Like, look at that. You can reset all these values too. But if you just want to focus on the highlights or the tones or the shadows, like, it's pretty cool. You can do all that. That's your color grading. Anyways, I know I got distracted, but you got your format and your render. So I'm going to hit render here. And the button next to that is your render queue. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my folder to save this in, and I'm going to save that out. So while this is rendering, this guy over here, the render queue, this is kind of nice, because let's say you're working on a project with like 10 different renderings and you don't want to sit here and wait. You can actually select all those renderings in your queue over here, or your outliner. And once they're selected, you can go over here and render them out with the render queue. So you could say like, hey, let me just get these ready, get these 10 ready, and then I'm gonna hit render and then go get lunch. And then when I'm back, they're done. So that's a nice little way to save some time. So you're not worried about, you know, waiting for the render to finish and then hitting render on the next one and so on. So anyways, that's out there. So depending on your computer specs and how good everything is, rendering should take, you know, 30 seconds to a minute. maybe 2 minutes, depending on your specs and everything. But generally pretty fast for a project slash scene of this size. So once we've got this, it's gonna say it took us 57 seconds. We can either hit open folder to go check out the rendering itself, or head over to the AI post-processing. So I'm gonna show you that because that is like one of my favorite features. And I'm gonna open this up. So double click this guy. And now we are in the AI render world. There's definitely a couple things I would probably like tweak and like continue revising the image. I think the overall image is a little bit bright and we're still getting those hotspots, and I'd probably rotate some of these guys and maybe add some more decals here. But that's the whole point of this process. Like you render out an image, you see what's wrong, and then you iterate, right? And you can also see we've got the nice reflection of the building here, but I also see the horizon here. So that's why I was talking about the importance of adding stuff opposite of the building. So now that I have all this feedback, I can start editing it, right, to improve the image. But before I do that, I do want to show you why you want to spend some time here. So there's a couple things I like to do here. There's the AI enhancer, which does a very nice job just enhancing the image. I kind of call this like a polish pass. It'll kind of make your people, your vegetation look a little bit nicer, but also respect the architecture at very like typical default settings. Just to show you what those settings are, you can choose how much you want to enhance the overall image as well as just the textures. You can also go ahead and just select specific things. So if you want the whole image, don't touch anything. If you just want to enhance people, you can select just people, right? So you've got that. Then you've got AI style transfer. And this one's a lot of fun because this is where you could do literal style transfers. So if you want it to look like a pen drawing, right, or a marker drawing, you can hit AI style transfer and it's going to send that off. So the other thing I use it for is the realistic side. So if you don't want to do winter settings or autumn settings, you can have it do that. My favorite thing is you could do a style transfer from a reference photo. So you can upload an image and it'll apply some of the properties of that photo to the image. But a little pro tip is if you don't select anything, like no image at all, you just click it and you tweak your settings right here. And I like to bring this down where it says style transfer weight, because I don't want a lot of weight of the reference photo, the fake reference photo, to be applied here. And I want my structure to be, you know, basically the same. I don't want my detail of the project to change too high. Crank that up to 1, you get a really good result. So I'll show you all three now that they're baking out. This right here, this is the light polish pass. So you can see it sharpened it, kind of fixed the lighting, and this looks really good. Like, let me zoom in. Look at that. So it did a good job there. Made my vegetation look nice. Made the trees and the cars look awesome. Look at that. Like, very, very light work, right? So it fixed the textures here, the materials here, and all the models. So like, why not use it, you know? And it's still very respectful to your architecture. That's the biggest thing. Like, you don't want it going crazy and just like changing things and you know, redesigning your project. You just want it to make your project look better. Like even the decaling on the asphalt, like look at how much better this got, right? So long story short, what I like to do with D5 is like get my rendering to be like 80% there and then have this kind of take care of the rest. Like I was complaining about over here with the hedges. Like I went in and fixed that, right? Even fixed some of the shading in here. It's like, this is such an easy way to just like boost your renderings. And then I was showing you some of the style transfer stuff. Like this is cool. This is like a fun thing. Like it didn't nail it perfectly and like I could definitely tweak my settings. But what I like about this is depending on where you are in the project, you might not need final renders, right? You might just need fun conceptual renderings to just sell a form or an idea of a project, and you don't have the materials kind of figured out yet, and you don't have, you know, all the lighting and everything kind of finished. This is totally fine. So don't forget, style rendering does exist, right? That's definitely something I feel like not enough people leverage. And then this is the style transfer guy. So let's see. So look at that. So like, doesn't it look just amazing? And it's like, I don't understand why it does such a good job, but like, look at the people, look at the cars, like everything looks insane, like to the next level. So that's my little trick there. I mean, like, look at this. This looks insane. It's like just like the difference between this and this. So play with those settings and you'll see you get amazing, incredible results. Like this is final render quality. And like I still have the option to go back and edit and refine. But anyways, the point with all this was just to kind of show you how you can go through D5, you know, relatively quickly, you know, import things, you know, add your materials, your lighting, post-processing, the camera settings, and then using AI in a very respectful way to just enhance the stuff that takes a lot of time. You know, it takes a lot of time to like get high quality vegetation in a scene and materials. So I'm glad we can kind of package that all in one class here. So I want you to keep working on this, you know, keep improving your rendering as needed and share it within the community. That's the whole point of like why we created this, you know, share with others, you know, provide feedback for others. I always love seeing what people are doing, especially from this, this course. So I hope you like this. And if you had a lot of fun following me along in this journey, you know, please consider joining the ArchViz Academy, the actual pro side of it, where we've got like another 30 hours plus of content like this, where it's like foundational, you know, talking about what makes a good material or a bad model, or like what you should be including in your renderings. If you like the theory stuff and follow along projects, it's perfect for that. It's an awesome community. But again, thank you. And if you have any questions, you know, do not hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. But thank you again. And I hope to keep updating this course and adding more lectures. But for the time being, this is going to get you from SketchUp all the way to beautiful renderings in about 3 or so hours. So hope you had fun. And thanks for taking the time to join me on this journey. See you in the next one. Bye.